all of that. In other news, could Boris Johnson actually go to prison over WhatsApp-gate, and what would that do for his support? I suspect it might go up. In other news, we're also going to be talking about this. Speeding up. Speeding fines are at a record high. Are the 20-mile-an-hour zones to blame for this? I don't mind admitting I got caught speeding the other day, so I've got some skin in the game here. And Philip Schofield, what is the latest in this scandal? Is it time for Holly Willoughby to go? One ITV former exec certainly thinks so. ITV are going to be hauled before the DCMS to give their account of events. And finally, I'm going to be discussing this. This story dropped just moments ago. I'm going in with it, actually, in just a second, and it is about new policing powers to just stop oil. Just stop it. Patrick Christys on GB News. Yes, you will not believe the reality of the way that especially Afghan asylum seekers are currently being treated on the continent. And it makes a mockery of all of those bleeding heart liberals who think that our Rwanda plan is unlawful and unjust. Turns out, shock horror, we are not the bad guys. GB Views at gbnews.com. Now it's your headlines.
Cheers, Patrick. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. A former Russian president warns that UK public officials who support Ukraine are legitimate military targets. Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council, says any UK military aid to Kyiv represents an undeclared war against Russia, calling British officials goofy and an eternal enemy. He says that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK can be considered a country at war. Well, former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon told us the threat isn't something to be concerned about.
Their threats of nuclear attack for the last 14 months have been, a completely vanishingly thin red line. So I think they're getting pretty desperate. They know that the counter-offensive is coming, and they know that ourselves, the Brits, are providing a lot of hardware, a lot of intelligence, and they think by threatening our MPs, they're going to change their mind. It might work in Russia, it won't work in this country.
Rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption due to strike action from the ASLEF union. Members have walked out today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday, causing major disruption to football fans travelling to London for the FA Cup at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. All tariffs have now been removed on goods exported from the UK to Australia and New Zealand. It's the first trade deal with the countries to come into effect in a post-Brexit negotiation. Shipment of British goods, such as signed Beano comics, are among the first to be sent under the new arrangements. It also means that red tape will be slashed for digital trade and work visas. But Shadow Secretary for International Trade, Nick Thomas-Symonds, says the deal is not clear on the exports.
It can deliver an economic boost if the government is willing to actually support our exporters properly. If you look at the moment, this year, 2023, the OBR is saying that exports overall will fall by 6.6%. That's a hit of over £51 billion to the economy.
A Conservative think tank is suing the US Department of Homeland Security to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records following revelations in his book that he took drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admission was documented in his visa application. The case will be held in a court in Washington, D.C. in front of a US federal judge next Tuesday, and that hearing will be open to the press. Labour Party donor Dale Vince says he will double donations to Just Stop Oil. His comments come amid controversy in the Labour Party over donations received from him. Tory leaders have called for Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to return funds from the donor. But Labour's Nick Thomas-Symonds told BBC News his party has been extremely clear on their views and that Mr Vince is perfectly entitled to give money to other causes. Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's energy bill support scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being urged to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on June the 30th. North Korea made a failed attempt at launching its first spy satellite. The launch sparked a false alarm in the South Korean capital Seoul, which you've just heard. While in Japan, a warning was issued to residents in the south. The incident comes as North Korea announced earlier it planned to launch a satellite by the 11th of June to monitor US military activities. It now says it will attempt a second launch as soon as possible. Smoke from a wildfire in the Highlands is visible from space. The fire in the hills above Loch Ness is now in its 4th day. Satellite images, which if you're watching on telly you can see, they're from NASA and they show the smoke from the blaze covering just over 3 square miles. It's currently drifting towards the loch. Well, 2 firefighters were injured during that incident and fire engines and specialist groups remain at this scene. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. Back to Patrick.
It's official. The EU treats asylum seekers worse than we do, and we are a total soft touch. The next time someone tells you that Britain is a racist country, that the Rwanda scheme is against human rights, and we are awful people, just show them this clip. Because new data from the International Rescue Committee shows just 271 Afghans were resettled in the EU in 2022. 0.1% of the 270,000 identified as in need of permanent protection. Some of them are kept in squalid camps on Greek islands. Not a single person has arrived under a scheme established in Germany in 2021 to resettle up to 1,000 Afghans a month, while Italy has taken just half of the refugees it promised. EU member states have consistently failed to deliver on legal resettlement promises. Some countries have not taken any Afghans at all. Wallop. There you go. We're spending £6 million a day on hotels for people illegally crossing the Channel. We're building more houses for them. We're rebuilding military bases and former prisons to accommodate them. We're giving them social housing stock. They can access our schools, hospitals, public services. They get paid a weekly allowance. We're offering them the opportunity to have a new, safe life in Rwanda. We're giving them taxpayer-funded legal aid to fight deportation, even when some people turn out to be criminals. We are not the bad guys. Is it any wonder they all want to come to Britain? The EU has 27 countries that can take more refugees and asylum seekers, and in many cases, they either don't take them or they put them in camps. Then once they've been granted refugee status, they just boot them out onto the street. Can you imagine the outrage if we were doing the same here? All those pearl-clutching EU lovies can get back in their box. Well, those are my views. I want to hear from you. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. Joining me now to discuss this is international security and border control expert Henry Bolton. Henry, thank you very much for joining me. I read this article today with some glee, actually, because, you know, if we were treating refugees and asylum seekers, especially Afghans, anything like our European friends, then can you imagine the outrage? But we're not. We're the good guys.
Indeed, Patrick. And, you know, it's good to hear somebody putting it so forthrightly as you just have done. You know, the other day I posted some pictures on social media of a refugee camp in Malta. And, you know, why can't we be doing this? If people are coming across the channel, why can't we be putting them in the same sort of facilities as the Maltese? Why are we putting them up in hotels? Refugee camps.
Yeah, it's all right. We've lost Henry there. I'll just fill you in on a couple of the details of this. So, according to this report, in Greece, what happens is then these asylum seekers are often housed in camps on islands. They are then potentially granted refugee status, and once they have been, they have 30 days to try to find their own accommodation. But the paperwork doesn't tend to catch up with them. So the problem with that is they end up homeless. And then you look around at a load of other countries that are supposed to be taking these refugees and asylum seekers, and they don't appear to even be bothering to do it. There is no forceful nature from the European Union in order to try to get them to do it whatsoever. But over here, the contrast is absolutely stark, isn't it? The amount of hotels, we're turning military bases and disused prisons, etc., at taxpayers' expense in local communities, rural communities that do not have the infrastructure or the facilities to cope with these people, and we're rolling the red carpet out. But in the European Union, where they will pontificate and go, oh, gosh, look at what they're doing there on this channel, they want to send them to Rwanda. Excuse me, what they're doing is 10 times worse than they're doing it on their own soil. Henry, I'll bring you back in. Henry Bolton, international security and border expert. Sorry, good to have you back, Henry. So, yes, if you see the conditions that these people are being kept in and the treatment and the lack of access to public services that they have in the European Union, I mean, Britain's like the Ritz.
Indeed, Patrick. And, then people ask, why do they come to Britain? And it's not simply because, they know people in the UK. It is because, as you've said, we are a soft touch. There is absolutely no deterrent whatsoever to coming to the UK. It's not difficult. It's not, when you get here, you get everything given to you on a plate. And there are those people who argue the opposite and say that we are appalling in the way that we treat these people. But we are not. We are amongst the most humanitarian, most diverse, most welcoming nations on this planet. Yep. And it sickens me when there are these people who keep talking us down. We do not have a bottomless pit of resources, of funding, of housing. And the European Union, which, lectures us, needs to actually have a look at its own house first. But on the other hand, Patrick, there are nations such as the Italians who are, at the moment, they have seen 47,000 people just come across the Mediterranean to Italy this year. That's twice the number of this time last year. So and the Italians are doing everything they can to discourage it by not providing decent facilities. So there's all sorts of bits in the mix. But and then you do get countries like Austria that welcome them sort of with open arms. I just want to paint a contrast.
I just want to paint a contrast between what happens if you arrive here illegally on a dinghy. You are sent to a hotel, very often at the taxpayer's expense. You are fed. You get legal aid to help with a deportation claim. We very often just cannot deport you at all. You can access various different local facilities and hospitals and our infrastructure, etc. You get a weekly allowance. If you are approved, then we will find somewhere for you to live, even at the expense of people who are already living here or on a social housing waiting list, for example. Yes. All of this stuff happens here, OK? And then, yet, if you are in Greece or in places like that, they either won't bother looking after you at all, they'll put you in a camp on an island, and then if they do decide to accept you as a refugee, you've got 30 days to find a job and a flat, otherwise you're out on the street.
That's indeed it. And when that happens, of course, they gravitate to somewhere where they will get those things, many of them do, and that's towards the UK. And we can, you don't even have to look at as far as Greece, to look at the way that European Union member states actually support or look after these people. You just have to look across the channel, see how the French do it. We're used to seeing those camps there. It's not much different in many countries of the European Union. So, your point is absolutely right, Patrick. But the question is, should we actually lower our standards? And I suggest that we should do things differently. I've advocated those people here should be put in bespoke camps, such as they do, for example, in Malta, where you've got secure accommodation, where the welfare, where the medical support and so on, and the policing support can be provided, all in one facility, rather than dispersing them around the nation. Stick them on Salisbury Plain or something like that. But the ultimate solution here is simply not to take so many people in.
Exactly.
That's the solution. And actually, the European Union needs to do the same thing. And Britain should be trying to take a lead on this and work, not within the European Union. It was impossible within the European Union. I know. I was working in Brussels at the time. But from outside, we can take a lead and set an example and say to some of the EU member states who are supportive of our position, or the position I'm taking, and say, work with us. Let's deal with this.
Well,
and let's deal with it upstream.
The EU likes full regulatory alignment, doesn't it? Well, why don't we start treating people the same? Now, I wouldn't necessarily condone that, because that would mean actively treating people worse. I don't think we need to lower our standards. I think we need to be a lot firmer. But why don't we start shaming those people across the pond over there on the continent? Excuse me, we are absolutely copying it here. They're telling us that we're this horrible little racist, unwelcoming island. And then people like you and I pipe up and go, well, hang on a minute. If that's true, why are so many people trying to come here? And the reality is because we treat them better than they do.
Our problem is, Patrick, we've got a whole bunch of people here in the UK who are absolutely putting out the story that we are appalling, that we're awful, that we break the law, international law, that we violate human rights and so on, that we don't welcome foreigners, we're all little racists and so on. We've got people in this country who are doing a bloody fine job, excuse me, of talking this country down internationally. And it gets traction with people like Guy Verhofstadt over in Brussels, for example, who roll it out. They're the problem.
But he needs to look closer to home.
In this country.
This is it. Henry, thank you very, very much. And I'm really pleased we've been able to inject a bit of common sense. And, people don't want to hear this stuff. People, who love the European Union and that they think that we are horrible, and they perpetuate this myth that Britain is some kind of horrible and welcoming place. They don't want to read this kind of thing. They don't want to hear this kind of thing. The reality is we are outstripping them in a vast majority of ways. And if we were treating people, especially Afghan refugees, anything like they're being treated in the vast majority of countries on the continent, then we would be absolutely hammered by all and sundry. Henry Bolton there, who is an international security and border control expert. As you can tell, I'm going to be picking up on this a lot. I'm also going to be talking about the news that we, taxpayers, you, me, everyone we know, have given apparently more than £1 million to a group that thinks that borders are horrible and wrong and evil, and a couple of other rather fruity groups as well. So I'll be revealing who they are very, very shortly. Get more on this on our website, though, gbnews.com. You'll find the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. Talking of breaking news, this did drop not so long ago. Are the days of Just Stop Oil ruining people's lives coming to an end? 10 activists were arrested at Parliament Square this morning, but now the government is trying to crack down on the protest group, and this could be good news for people, ordinary working-class people going out, trying to earn £1 now every day. Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood joins me now with the details. What's going on?
Well, the government is amending, or seeking to amend, the Public Order Act. Now, this act was brought in to clamp down precisely on disruptive protests like those carried out by groups like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. But through its passage through Parliament, the act was significantly watered down, particularly in the House of Lords, taking out many specific elements that would have been able to crack down on these protests. As a result, a sort of weakened form of the bill went through, became the act, and we have seen police sort of escort protesters through their protests, walking slowly across the roads in a very different way to how we've seen, for example, the German police crack down on protesters in that country.
Ruthlessly efficient.
But now the government is changing the way that this act may work through what's known as secondary legislation. Critics of it call it Henry VIII powers. Why? Because it doesn't need to pass through the House of Commons and the House of Lords, so they can get around the anti-government majority in the House of Lords using this clever manoeuvre. Not your law yet, but the proposals that the government is now committed to change the definition of, quote, serious disruption to life in the community within the bill. Before, police wouldn't be interrupting these protests unless they could prove serious disruption, a fairly nebulous term. Well, now what the government is looking to do is define serious disruption to include the cumulative effect of protests. So if there have been a number of Just Stop Oil protests, for example, and someone turns up in a Just Stop Oil shirt, the police might be able to think, hang on, this is more serious than if it was just a one-off. Yep. Similarly, they want the sense of community. Currently in the bill, it's about disrupting the community. This secondary legislation would clarify that to mean sort of people who it affects, not just those who live by there. Yep. If it's a main road, not many people live by there. There's ambiguity as to whether that's the quote-unquote community. Yep. So that's another change. change, but also changing the definition to a hindrance that is more than minor to carrying out day-to-day activities, and this is the key bit, particularly making a journey. So adding in those words to the legislation means the police can be much more on it when it comes to road blockages. And finally, changing the threshold from serious disruption, quote-unquote serious disruption, to, from significant and prolonged to disruption that is more than minor. So instead of having to wait until this is prolonged disruption, which seems counterintuitive if you want to stop a protest, more than minor disruption will now be the threshold. So those are big changes to the definition of various parts of the Public Order Act that could well have a big impact on the ground. A lot of people have been very frustrated when they've been saying, well, the government passed this bill that was proposed, that was denigrated by its opponents as an anti-protest bill, as a crackdown on civil liberties. Well, actually, perhaps it didn't have as much teeth in it originally as many people thought.
Exactly, and this, of course, comes on the day, doesn't it, that their big donor and backer and also a Labour Party donor and backer as well, Dale Vince is his name, has vowed to match any donations to Just Stop Oil that are made. So he will match them himself, therefore doubling the donations. So I just think it's interesting timing. And we've got the FA Cup final on Saturday, haven't we? That is going to be an absolute gift for Just Stop Oil because you've got fans from Manchester United and Manchester City making the route to Wembley. So all they've got to do, and we can see this coming a mile off, so I don't mind, so I'm not giving them any ideas before anyone pipes up in the inbox. Everyone can see this coming a mile off. You just pick the arterial route from Manchester into London and they block it, and there you go. You've got massive, massive, massive disruption. So if we can all see that coming, one would hope that the police would be on top of that and we can get specifically Manchester United fans to Wembley on time so that they can see the mighty Reds. Anyway, Tom, thank you very much. There's Tom Harwood there, our deputy political editor. But more on all of that a little bit later on. The controversy, though, over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages is rumbling on. Could he actually be jailed? And could this story cause problems for Rishi Sunak? Yes, a couple of people here with skin in the game. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A record number of Brits were fined after being caught speeding last year. In a few minutes, I'll find out what is going on. And I will also get the latest on the Philip Schofield scandal as Holly Willoughby now faces calls to resign. But ministers have been accused of a COVID inquiry cover-up after former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's WhatsApps have apparently vanished. The Cabinet Office claims it no longer has the material, which they insisted was unambiguously irrelevant to the inquiry. Anyway, the inquiry's chair, Baroness Hallett, agreed to extend the original deadline of 4 p.m. yesterday for the government to hand over Johnson's unredacted COVID-era WhatsApp messages, diaries and notebooks to tomorrow. And we broke the news right here on this show yesterday with Christian Calgie from The Express, didn't we? That an individual involved in handing over Boris Johnson's personal information to the police is actually related by marriage to Harriet Harman. Who would have thought that? I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, so they've all vanished, they've gone missing. What's going on?
Well, it seems as though the Cabinet Office has got itself into a bit of a pickle. Yesterday it gave multiple different excuses why it was unable to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages. First, it claimed that it would undermine the concept of collective responsibility for the government if it handed them over. Then it claimed that it was that those messages were unambiguously irrelevant and there was no need to hand them over. And then finally, in a big plot twist, they claimed mid-afternoon that actually they didn't have those messages at all. Tory MPs I've spoken to are pretty angry. They feel as though the Cabinet Office has really mishandled this situation. But essentially, tomorrow afternoon, Baroness Hallett is expecting either to receive those unredacted messages, in which case the Cabinet Office is going to have to dig them out from somewhere, or she's expecting a statement of truth from a senior civil servant, essentially bearing witness to the fact that they don't have those messages at all. And if she receives neither that statement of truth nor the messages themselves, then she's threatening to go nuclear and potentially take the government to court over this, claiming that in refusing to hand them over, the government could be breaking criminal law. So it's pretty dramatic, and we're all waiting on tenterhooks for tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock.
Well, we are, absolutely, and it will be on this very show as the clock ticks down. Olivia, thank you very much. She'll be there with all of the updates. Olivia Utley, our political reporter. Philip Blond joins me now. Now, Philip is a former advisor to David Cameron. Philip, great stuff. Thank you very, very much. What do you make of all of this? I mean, there is the veiled threat of Boris Johnson potentially going to prison.
Look, I think for all the legal advice, it's firmly on the judge's side. They would lose a case in court if they tried to pretend they had the messages, but they deem it irrelevant. That's up to the judge of the inquiry to deem whether it's relevant or not. And the idea they've lost the WhatsApp messages reminds me of the trial involving Wayne Rooney's wife, where the defendant lost her mobile phone through throwing it in the North Sea. So I just don't see how the idea that they've lost the WhatsApp messages holds water, because in effect, how could that be the case unless they were intentionally erased?
With respect, Philip, could you forgive the government for not playing ball on this? They have seen numerous different quote-unquote stitch-ups. There's the Dominic Raab side of things. Turns out a top civil servant who handed Boris's diaries to the police as a family link to Harriet Harman. You know, there's all of this stuff going on, isn't there? And if I was them, I think I would be inclined to go, you know what, no, you're not having any of it, because all you're going to do is leak all of this stuff to the press. Every single thing will be out there, and it's quite unfair anyway. I understand that people want to know the backgrounds behind whether or not they knew that lockdown would have much of an effect. Vaccine safety, believe me, I get all of this. But I also think that digging up whether or not Boris Johnson has sent a fruity WhatsApp in the middle of a pandemic just so that the BBC could have a field day with it is not a great look.
Look, I think you make a good point. Government ministers have to be able to talk frankly to one another, and they do that via WhatsApp, and they're often very frank indeed. So I think that there is a legitimate defence that, you know, the public, you know, effective government has to have private lines of discussion which aren't open to the public. Now, this shouldn't leak because it goes to the judge. If it does leak, I imagine it would be, you know, a criminal matter, not though that you can ever find the source of a leak, it appears. So I think if it was transferred directly to the judge, I don't think that is a concern. I think the judge isn't a Labour appointee. If the medium via which it goes kind of is a political activist, well, obviously that is a concern, but it's not beyond the wit of government to choose another kind of way to pass that information. And I think the court has the power under the Inquiries Act to compel disclosure. And it just beggars belief, I think, that they've somehow vanished mystically as a result of what? It can only be intentional deletion, can it not?
Yeah, and I can very much see both sides of this, Philip. Thank you very, very much. Philip Blonde there is a former advisor to David Cameron. And I really can, because on one side of it, I think, like everyone, really, we want to know who knew what when it came to things like, were lockdowns actually ever going to work? You know, did they know that there might have been issues with certain vaccines, etc.? We all kind of want to know this stuff, don't we? There's the gossip angle of it, but I just think, you know, given the way that various people have been stitched up in the past, can we really trust that very intimate messages won't be leaked? I think, and something I'm going to be talking about a bit later on as well, I think Rishi Sunak is probably quite upset about all of this, because if there is any evidence there whatsoever that he was plotting behind Boris Johnson's back, all of those people who said that he was a snake in the grass, as it were, or a backstabber, will indeed be proven right. And what does that mean for him at the next general election? He's already in a bit of trouble, isn't he? But there we go. More on that later. Loads more still to come, though, between now and 4 p.m. As 20-mile-an-hour limits are blamed for a record number of motorists being caught speeding, I will ask whether or not they're a good or a bad thing. And I have to admit, for the first time in my life, I have got some skin in the game on this, because I got done recently. And there's the latest on Philip Schofield's scandal as MPs get ready to grill ITV bosses. But first, your latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Cheers, Patrick. UK public officials that support Ukraine are being warned they are military targets. The threat comes from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council. He hit out at British officials, calling them goofy, adding that any UK military aid to Ukraine is seen as an undeclared war against Russia. He said that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK can be considered a country at war. Rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption due to strike action from the ASLEF union. Members have walked out today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday, causing major disruption to the FA Cup final at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. A Conservative think tank is suing the US Department of Homeland Security to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records following revelations in his book that he took drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admissions was documented in his visa application. The case will be held in a court in Washington, D.C. in front of a US federal judge next Tuesday. And smoke from a wildfire in the Highlands is visible from space. The fire in the hills above Loch Ness is now in its 4th day. Satellite images, which if you're watching on telly you can see, they're from NASA and they showed smoke from the blaze, which covers just over 3 square miles. It's drifting towards the loch. Well, 2 firefighters were injured during the incident, and fire engines and specialist groups remain at the scene. That's the latest, and you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
All right, let's take a wee look at today's markets. The pound, that will buy you $1.2372 and 1.1591 euros. The price of gold, that's sitting at £1,587 and 74 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100, that is at 7,484 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
New figures show that the number of drivers convicted for speeding has reached an 8-year high. More than 230,000 motorists were prosecuted for exceeding the speed limit in England and Wales last year, a 16% increase on the number prosecuted in 2021. That is according to data produced by Churchill Insurance. Motoring groups put the rise down to the growing number of 20-mile-an-hour speed limit zones in the UK. And there are some notable, high-profile, dare I even say it, famous names amongst those who've been convicted for speeding. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, was caught speeding in a 50-mile-per-hour zone last summer and was given the choice of paying a fine or attending a speed awareness course. We're all aware of the political furore which followed those revelations just this month. There was no divine intervention to save the Archbishop of Canterbury from being fined for exceeding a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit just days before presiding over the coronation of King Charles. Pop star Rachel Stevens from S Club 7 is reportedly facing a ban after putting her foot down on 2 occasions in a 20-mile-an-hour zone near her home in Regent's Park. And then there's this fella who presents his own show on GB News. Yes, folks, I've put my hands up to admit that I broke the speed limit recently, although I am awaiting official confirmation of what will no doubt be a rather devastating ticket. Joining me now is Howard Cox. He's the founder of Fair Fuel UK campaign. He's also running for London Mayor and wants to scrap ULEZ and the 20-mile-an-hour zones. Is it just a cash cow to drain motorists dry, this 20-mile-an-hour stuff, or is it better for public safety?
Patrick, I hope you're feeling guilty about what you've done, breaking the speed limit. I mean,
shame.
What was it, about 21 miles an hour in a 20 zone?
It's not quite, mate, but we'll leave that there.
Well, look, this is all part of the local council and national government menu of anti-driver policies that they've become an epidemic of cash-grabbing policies that have seen, you know, that they just don't have any idea about road transport management right across the UK. And I can assure you that all it's trying to do is it's now become a big brother plan to stop us all driving and to be imprisoned in 15-minute zones.
Is it actually better for things like safety, though, or the amount of time it takes you to get to where you need to be, so congestion, and presumably as well then the environment?
No, I mean, again, there is sparse evidence that 20-mile-an-hour zones are reducing accidents. I mean, a study by the Queen's University last year found that while speed limits reduce traffic, they do little to stop accidents. And as far as actually in terms of pollution, the slower you drive, the car becomes less efficient and uses more fuel and puts out more emissions. So this is all completely and utterly fantasy land, and it's purely, and I repeat, a cash-grabbing approach by the politicians across the country.
Why do you feel so strongly about this, though? I mean, why should people really care? Because I suppose the argument would be, well, look, if you just stick to the speed limit, then you've got nothing to worry about.
Well, that's right, but the problem about sticking to 20 mile an hour, it's almost impossible to stick to 20 mile an hour because you're looking at the speedometer and you're not looking at the road ahead. And let's face it, it's happened, and this is an interesting one. I've been overtaken in 20 mile an hour zones by cyclists. and they're not actually subject to it, and they're protected by the highway code in the hierarchy of blame, they'll never be touched. They can do what they want when they want. And interestingly, one cyclist told me it's great to overtake cars in 20-mile zones because it feels like they rule the highways.
But when you combine that with ULEZ and the amount of money that motorists are getting clobbered with now, under the guise of saving our environment, and they always use examples, don't they, of children in these adverts going, oh, don't ruin my lungs with these toxic fumes and things like that. Is it all actually just a ruse for councils and mayoral candidates, etc., and like yourself, of course, to try to raise more money and just rinse us dry?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of the only candidates that has actually done some economic analysis about the impact of ULEZs on the City of London. And bear in mind, we're talking being a bit London-centric here, but right across the country, this is coming to cities around the country. And I showed in this economic analysis that ULEZs cost the economy of London £1 billion, or approaching that sort of thing. And it's madness, it really is. It's purely because people like Sadiq Khan can't manage their economy or their budgets well enough, and they're in a great big deficit of a big black hole.
But just quickly, Howard, as well, it's not just that. I mean, I don't mind saying the way I got done was I was on a motorway. I was actually on my way back from Boston in Lincolnshire, but I would go again. Right. And I got done by one of these variable speed limits. So I'm driving along. I'd been driving for about 3 hours, so, OK. I mean, I do want to say this is entirely my own fault, by the way. I'm not trying to pin the blame on anybody else. It was a careless moment behind the wheel. But right in front of me, this thing flashes up, gone from a motorway, 3 lanes, 4 lanes, completely empty, flashes up, 50. I kind of clocked it, but didn't, really. I got the radio on, you know. And then, yeah, by the time I slowed down, the flash went off. And I just thought, you know, this is all a bit... They're just finding new ways to get people, aren't they? But I'm going to have to leave it there, Howard. Thank you very, very much. Always a pleasure. It's Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK campaign, also a London mayoral candidate. ULEZ isn't just in London. They've got it in Birmingham as well, and I found that out the hard way. But should Holly Willoughby lose her job on This Morning? One former ITV executive has told her that she's got to go because she's, quote, damaged goods. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. At 4 p.m, I will tell you why the EU is being accused of staggering neglect of Afghan refugees, keeping them in prison-like conditions, the kind of news story that the Europhiles absolutely hate. And let's be honest, it reveals once and for all what a soft touch we are, and frankly, that we are not the bad guys. But on to the latest on the Philip Schofield scandal. And a former senior ITV executive says Holly Willoughby should lose her job because she's damaged goods. Holly is due to return to This Morning next Monday, but Ian McCulloch, who's the former commercial director at ITV, has told GB News that her position is now untenable. I want to talk about the hearing that ITV bosses face next week with the Commons, Culture, Media and Sports Committee as well. Let's speak now with media commentator Paul Connew. Now, Paul, it's important to say, actually, this meeting was already booked in. It's not like ITV have been hauled before it as a result of this, although essentially they should have been anyway. Have they not now got to put up some of their top execs to face very, very serious questions about things like what's the line between mentoring and grooming and who knew what when?
Very, very much so, Patrick. Although this was a scheduled meeting, it was due to be attended on ITV's part by rather a faceless bureaucrat, in a sense. Now, MPs will be demanding, I'm sure, that Caroline McCall, the chief executive, is there, along with other executives. And although she can't be compelled to appear, I think it would be a very bad look if Caroline McCall didn't attend and face a grilling, along with Kevin Lygo, the director of programming, and possibly Martin Frizzell, the editor of This Morning.
But when you look at some of the people that ITV have got rid of, you know, Jeremy Clarksons or whatever, and a few other people that are knocking about, Jeremy Kyle, basically anyone called Jeremy, apparently, and Piers Morgan, of course, and you think, well, actually, they were seen as the bad guys. God, these people are toxic, aren't they? You can't possibly have them. And then the accusations are, of course, that Philip has had a fruity relationship with a young chap, and that potentially quite a few people at ITV knew about that and covered it up. And you just start to wonder whether or not there needs to be some kind of root and branch investigation here, because just maybe everybody who likes to give the impression that they're quite nice, maybe they're not.
Well, I think one of the big questions the MPs will be asking is, was there a real investigation at all? ITV says there was an investigation, but from what's emerging now, the question mark is, was it really an investigation, or did somebody just say, is it true? And people said, no. Oh, thank you very much, that's good news, and off they went. But one contact of mine who's worked on the programme says that you wouldn't have needed either Sherlock Holmes or even dear old Dixon of Dock Green to establish the facts here. And it's the old adage, it's not so much the original offence, if you like, it's the cover-up that does the damage. And now ITV are in real crisis. Whether Holly Willoughby can survive, whether This Morning can survive, or whether there's going to have to be at least 1 or 2 senior executives go is now the question. But I think there certainly will be some heads rolling.
Yeah, no, indeed. You raised a series of very, very good points. Paul, thank you. Short and sweet, but I think you got to the point there. Paul Connew, who's a media commentator. We will be following that very, very closely right here on GB News. But yesterday, this is something that we followed extremely closely, wasn't it, as well? trans rights activists stormed, rather predictably, a talk with a feminist philosopher, Kathleen Stock, at Oxford Union. She spoke for around 10 minutes before activists from the university's LGBTQ society started booing, waving rainbow flags. 3 protesters interrupted the talk and shouted, "No more dead trans kids." One demonstrator glued their hand to the floor, and the event was delayed by almost half an hour. So, joining me now is Caroline Fisk, who's the co-founder of Conservatives for Women. Caroline, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, first and foremost, who are the good guys here, for want of a better phrase, if I can even say that now? You know, you've got a free speech element there being interrupted by, a load of gobby youngsters.
Well, I mean, the good guys are the Oxford Union for staging the debate and Professor Kathleen Stock for having the courage to go along in what I think is an intimidating environment and to hold her ground. And we absolutely need people like her, and we need thousands more people like her.
She wouldn't budge an inch on this notion, a ridiculous notion, that some of these trans rights activists have the potential to actually be violent and send death threats. And she was adamant that she's not moving an inch on that. And I think she's right to do so.
I think she's right. What was interesting for me is that it's the first time I really saw that within the sort of gender-critical community, if I can call it that, there is actually disagreement. I disagree with her when she said, if we could ever reach the day where it could be shown that trans-identifying men don't pose a threat to women in women's spaces, then they should be allowed in. I would completely disagree with her on that. I would say we should never allow men into women-only spaces because it's not just about violence, it's also about privacy and dignity and also women's right to self-organise. So what I'd love to see is us move forward again and actually have some debates within the gender-critical community that other people could listen to, and I think that would be really interesting.
One thing I think is not given enough media attention is that slogan there, "No more dead trans kids." Obviously, no one wants anyone to die, OK? That is, I believe, referring largely to things like suicide rates amongst the trans community. What that, in my view, completely ignores is pre-existing mental health conditions that have maybe contributed to them finding themselves in the situation that they are in, and then the tragedy happens somewhere down the line there. Not necessarily because they are suffering bullying and abuse as a result of being trans.
OK, so those statistics are simply fake. I mean, it's just a slogan, no more dead trans kids. Everybody would agree with that. But it's simply a slogan. Ask somebody saying that to find the statistics to show the study, and you'll see that there isn't one.
OK, I mean, have you got any evidence to say that there isn't a disproportionate number of dead?
Well, I mean, I would refer anyone to the books that have now been written by Helen Joyce or more recently Hannah Barnes, and they dig into the statistics, and they will say that a lot of those quotes come from a couple of studies with about 40 people, which didn't prove that anyway. So I haven't got anything particular to hand, but that's generally because there isn't anything. So you dig and you can't find it.
Are we at a crossroads in society? I do not have children yet. I am very concerned about what the reality, quotes unquote, is going to be like as and when, if I do. I would rather them not be confused beyond what I think they need to be as children. If my point being, people like yourself, Kathleen Stock, you could name quite a few other people, if you don't win this fight, are we doomed?
Yes, and I would say we're not at a crossroads yet. We're still so far back from that. So the Daily Mail was sort of saying, at last. I think we're not at all in an at-last position. You know, we had the debate last night. Today, there will be lecture theatres where not a single professor will stand up and say that sex is real. If somebody in a workplace in the UK says that sex is real, she'll be bullied. So we're so far from the crossroads and we finally are talking reality again. So it's just full on to keep challenging these people.
So many people self-censor.
Yeah.
So many people self-censor, and this is how they stifle the discussion, because for the vast majority of people out there who just have, you know, a normal office job or going to a dinner party or down the pub or whatever, it is never worth their while to pipe up and say how they really feel, which I think gives the false impression that the majority of people think that men can be women.
Yes, and so the people that I would like to call out is senior leadership in the public sector, in the private sector, right across this country. I was working with a journalist recently and we were simply looking for a civil servant to say, you know, sex is real and I'm bullied in my workplace. And do you know that they wouldn't even say it, they wouldn't even give the quote because they would say, I would lose my job for simply saying sex is real. So I think we hardly know the extent of the silencing and the bullying. And so I immediately thought, where is the head of the DWP? Where is the head of the Ministry of Justice? And they need to be making very clear in their workplaces that women can state biological facts and that we have free speech.
But to call out lies as well, I had Peter Tatchell on, and Peter does a turn every now and again, and, you know, he puts up his side of the case. But he said to me, the cases of biological men going into women's space and there being any issue are few and far between. Whilst he was on air, I just Googled it. One wallop pops up from a couple of months ago. You don't have to look very hard for it. There is a risk to women.
I mean, there is a risk to women. But I would even say if there isn't a risk to women, we have a right to our spaces. And it's also about dignity and privacy. So women like to be alone in their single-sex spaces. So I don't think we don't need to be forced and to show me the right to our single-sex spaces.
And I think it's so vital that these discussions are had now because that argument, like there might be with a lot of political fads, etc., of, oh, well, they'll grow out of it, it can be too late. By the time you've gone through gender reassignment and you've had bits of you cut off and you've been on these hormones and all of this stuff, well, I'm sorry, but it is too late for someone who wakes up one day when they're 21 years old and thinks, what the heck have I done to my body? But thank you, I could talk to you all day about this, but I'll chat to you again very, very soon. It's Caroline Fister, who's co-founder of Conservatives for Women. Now, the EU stands accused of staggering neglect of Afghan refugees who are in what's branded anyway prison-like conditions on Greek islands. I just want to reiterate, can you imagine, I'm going to lay out all the facts here, OK? Can you imagine if we treated people like European Union countries are treating them? We are not the bad guys. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's Patrick Christys, it's 4 p.m, it's GB News, and get a load of this, OK? The EU is officially treating asylum seekers worse than we are. Squalid camps on islands, dumping them out onto the street, not taking enough, but somehow, because of Rwanda, we're the bad guys. I am getting stuck right into that. And could Boris Johnson actually go to prison over WhatsApp Gate? I suspect that might make his support go through the roof. In other news, we're also going to be talking about this. Too fat to fly, OK? Should fat people pay more to be on aircraft? Should they be weighed a little bit like the luggages? This is the latest conversation. How would that work? Would it not be embarrassing? Sorry, sir, you look like a zoo animal. You can't fly today. And should Harry be deported? I'm addressing you now, Joe Biden. Please do not give us back Prince Harry. But hey, he might be over his revelations about drug use in his tell-all book. Wow. All of this coming your way and much more very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News. Emails thick and fast, please. gbviews@gbnews.com. Yes, shock horror. We treat asylum seekers much better than the EU. Britain is a soft touch. gbviews@gbnews.com. Headlines now with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. A former Russian president warns that UK public officials who support Ukraine are legitimate military targets. Dmitry Medvedev, who's the deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council, says any UK military aid to Kyiv represents an undeclared war against Russia. Calling British officials goofy and an internal enemy, Medvedev says that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK can be considered a country at war. Former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon told us the threat isn't something to be concerned about.
No, their threats of nuclear attack for the last 14 months have been, a completely vanishingly thin red line. So I think they're getting pretty desperate. They know that the counteroffensive is coming, and they know that ourselves, the Brits, are providing a lot of hardware, a lot of intelligence, and they think by threatening our MPs, they're going to change their mind. It might work in Russia, it won't work in this country.
Well, in news here at home, rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption due to strike action from the ASLEF union. Members have walked out today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday, causing major disruption to football fans travelling to London for the FA Cup at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. Now, all tariffs have been removed on goods exported from the UK to Australia and New Zealand. It's the first trade deal with the countries to come into effect in a post-Brexit negotiation. Shipments of British goods, such as signed Beano comics, are among the first to be sent under the new arrangements. It also means that red tape will be slashed for digital trade and work visas. Minister for International Trade, Nigel Huddleston, says both goods and services will benefit.
Will benefit every single region and nation of the UK, and it will add billions and billions of pounds to the UK economy, which surely is a good thing. It will make it easier for British producers to export because we're removing tariffs overseas, and also easier as well because we're easing, for example, the border checks. And also it's not just for goods, it's services as well that we're able to support overseas. So it's a really good news story for the British economy. It'll add to economic activity and add to wages in the UK. So what's not to like?
A Conservative think tank is suing the US Department of Homeland Security to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records following revelations in his book that he took drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admission was documented in his visa application. The case will be held in a court in Washington, D.C., in front of a US federal judge next Tuesday. The hearing will be open to the public. Labour Party donor Dale Vince says he'll double donations to Just Stop Oil. His comments come amid controversy in the Labour Party over donations received from him. Tory leaders have called for Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to return funds from the donor. But Labour's Nick Thomas-Symonds told BBC News his party has been extremely clear on their views and that Mr Vince is perfectly entitled to give money to other causes. Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's energy bill support scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being urged to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on the 30th of June. Now, North Korea made a failed attempt at launching its first spy satellite. That's not the launch of the satellite sounding there. That is the false alarm in the South Korean capital, Seoul, while in Japan a warning was issued to residents in the south as well. The incident comes as North Korea announced earlier it planned to launch a satellite by the 11th of June to monitor US military activities. It now says it'll attempt a second launch as soon as possible. Smoke from a wildfire in the Highlands of Scotland is visible from space. The fire in the hills above Loch Ness is now in its 4th day. Satellite images from NASA show the smoke from the blaze, which covers just over 3 square miles, drifting towards the loch. 2 firefighters were injured during the incident and fire engines and specialist groups remain at the scene. Those are your latest news stories. You're watching GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, look, in just a second, I'm going to be talking about the way that the EU has been revealed to be treating asylum seekers and illegal immigrants, etc. And we're going to be doing a compare and contrast with the way that we're doing it. We are a massively soft touch. And if we were treating them anywhere near as badly as what's going on in the continent, we will be hearing about it day in, day out. But before I talk about this is an urgent appeal to President Joe Biden. Please don't deport Prince Harry back to the UK. You don't seem to want to deport anyone else, so please don't make an example of him. There is a court case ongoing over the issue of whether or not Harry lied on his visa application about his drug use. Past drug use can be grounds to deny a visa application for the US, and in his book, where Harry admitted to taking cocaine, cannabis and mushrooms. President Biden, we don't want Harry back. He's your problem now. He is a lying, whinging traitor who threw our royal family, his own family and our country under the bus. He seems to hate everything about us. He's leeched off the taxpayer his whole life, and now he thinks we still owe him something. He offers nothing to our country. We don't want him. In fact, I think if the US deport him, we should make him stateless. Burn his British passport. I will never forgive him for the way he treated the Queen and Prince Philip in their final moments, and the damage he has tried to do to our monarchy and, by definition, Britain. But, President Biden, my main plea to not return Harry is this. He would probably want to bring Meghan back with him. She has always been your problem. She is one of you. You created that monster, and we have suffered enough as a result. Please do not inflict whinge and ginge back onto Britain. We do not want them pontificating about the plight of impoverished, marginalised groups from the terrace of their Chelsea mansion. We do not want their sage wisdom about climate change from the steps of their private jet at Biggin Hill Airport. Mr. President, I beg you, do not deport Harry. I I will be talking shortly to the chap who is helping to bring a legal case in America to see whether or not the US will deport him, so that will be an interesting conversation. GBviews at gbnews.com, and make sure that you get in touch on all of that. But now on to our top story, without further dither and delay, to a shocking report that accuses the EU of staggering neglect of Afghan refugees. Only 271 Afghans were resettled in the EU in 2022 last year. Incredibly, that's just 0.1% of the 270,000 people who, they said, were in need of protection. And the charity, the International Rescue Committee, says that many asylum seekers are staying in prison-like conditions on Greek islands. Meanwhile, here, come here illegally, £6 million a day on hotels, access to all our public services. We'll even give you legal aid to fight your deportation. We'll offer you the chance of a new life in Rwanda. Good grief, we are there for the taking. Joining me now to discuss this is GB News contributor and former MEP Martin Daubney. Martin, it's the story we all knew was happening. We are not the bad guys.
Well, Patrick, don't you just love the stench of European Union hypocrisy? That's what this story is about, because don't forget, we are the closed-minded, closed borders, little Englanders who drew up the drawbridge to the world when we Brexited, and open borders, so beloved of the European Union, were absolutely central to their bloc's dream. And yet here we are. The reality hits home. It is they who drew up the drawbridge. They who are locking people out, fleeing war zones, while at the same time saying to us that we should openly accept as many economic migrants as we can possibly house and beyond, who are traipsing through several European Union member states before they even get to us. And this is absolutely totemic and emblematic of what they do out there. Nothing. It's a complete talking shop. Patrick, I'll never forget the day I was in there and we were asked to vote. The European Union, they queued up one by one, the socialists, the Greens, the Liberals, to condemn Donald Trump for imprisoning Mexicans on the border of America who'd entered his country illegally. He was perfectly entitled to do that. It had nothing to do with the European Union, and yet they threw themselves to their fainting couches, condemning his actions. And yet now look, when it comes to their own borders, they are basically closed to people genuinely fleeing war zones. It's absolutely emblematic of their stupidity.
No Afghans have actually been able to access Germany's 1,000 a month Afghan resettlement policy. In Greece, they put them on detention camps on some of the islands, and then once they grant them leave to remain, they say you've got 30 days to get out of there, find yourself a job and a flat with your entire family, otherwise you're homeless. Whereas here, I mean, Martin, the amount of money that we're dishing out, we give them a weekly allowance. We're building new houses for them. It's absolutely bonkers, Martin.
Yeah, and also Italy, Patrick, have only fulfilled half of their obligations. Don't forget, in Meloni, we have a prime minister who pledged to end open borders across the Mediterranean. But even they have taken far, far more than Germany. But you're right. We have limitless, it seems, capacity to take these people in. We should be, I think, welcoming. I, for one, definitely question the 606,000 net migration figures announced on Thursday last week. We are simply opening our borders too much. But in the case of a genuine war, particularly one where we had our fingerprints on it, our servicemen have boots on the ground in Afghanistan, you could argue we have more of an obligation. And yet the European Union is absolutely closing its borders. They are the precise thing they accuse us of. They are small-minded, closed borders, hypocrites.
And the hypocrisy is exactly what I want to call out here. And I am not necessarily saying we should lower our standards. I don't want us to start actively treating people worse. I want us to take much fewer of them. I want us to be much stricter, of course. I don't think we need to sink ourselves to the lowest common denominator. But I certainly think we should be shouting across the channel, going, excuse me, you are not doing half as much as we are. But, Martin, it's no wonder, is it, that people are desperate to come here? And the reason is obvious. It's because we treat them better. We're a soft touch.
Yeah, and, you know, stories like this, for all of its faults, it drives a coach and horses, Patrick, through this Romaniac myth that Britain is a racist, unwelcoming, xenophobic cesspit. Why is it that people are risking their lives to get here? Because we are a fantastic country whose hospitality is being endlessly abused. And then the Linekerites accuse us of behaving like 1930s Germany, when the European Union literally will not take people fleeing a war zone that they were involved in directly. And I think that's what this is about. It's about complete double standards. And Guy Verhofstadt, the man who puts the BS into Brussels, He's on Twitter today saying that we should want to rejoin the European Union. For what? For more of this? The fact we're Britain means we're nimble. 27 member blocks haven't been able to agree on a single thing about the Afghan policy. Meanwhile, we've been nimble, we've been quick, as we're on vaccines. No, I don't regret a single moment, Patrick, of going to Brussels and getting shut of this lot, because if we were still in there, we'd be part of this chaos too.
Yeah, exactly. And they need to front up to it, OK? They need to stop. This shatters that illusion, as you were talking about. It shatters the illusion of the good guys versus the bad guys. We are doing more. And again, I just want to reiterate to people, if you arrive in somewhere like Greece, or you find yourself in somewhere like Greece, and this is, by the way, as a certified Afghan refugee. So these aren't just the people who claim to be from SOA. These are certified Afghan refugees. There's every chance they will put you on an island in a detention centre. They'll take ages to process you. You won't be able to access the public services when you're over there. They'll say to you eventually, if they do indeed, so, yeah, all right, you can stay. You've got 30 days to get out of here. Your paperwork won't catch up with you, so you will find yourself homeless somewhere on the streets of Athens with your kids and just left to wander around. And yet, when what we want to do here is say, well, we'll process your asylum claim. And by the way, that's taking ages. And if you want to fight it, we'll give you taxpayer-funded money in order to do that. And then if you want to go and start a new life with your family in Rwanda, a safe country, then you can do that. And for some reason, we're the big racists here.
Yeah, and it's also a delicious irony, Patrick. When you look at this charity International Rescue Committee, it's headed up by none other than David Miliband, the greater of the two Miliband brothers, who's a frothing at the mouth Romaniac and one of the biggest critics of Brexit, one of the biggest fans of Brussels. And today, we've had the slight rustling of tumbleweed from those who normally sing the praises of the European Union. Absolutely silent on this, an absolute dereliction of duty, an abdication of human rights, of helping those fleeing a war zone. And the European Union today are proving to be the precise thing that they accuse us of, Patrick.
But we've got to be bolder, Martin. We've got to be bolder. This, surely, is the opportunity that the government... It's a gift. It's a gift. When we say, look, we're going to be strong on this. We cannot, as taxpayers... You know, we are redoing up historic military bases to house some of these people. We are plonking, in some cases, around 1,000 people in a rural community with nothing to do all day, with no extra provision for GP surgeries or schools, etc. We're going to extreme lengths here, OK? And for anyone who thinks that this can carry on, well, it can't. And if you think that's evil, then you're more than welcome to go and move to the European Union, where, my friend, you will find the situation is actually much worse.
Yeah, and I've been to places like Linton on Ouse, Patrick, and I've spoken with locals who are very, very concerned about safety of their children. 500 people live in that small village, and 100 of those are children. There's going to be 1,500 men dumped on that town. People have every right to be concerned about that. This is a huge invasion of their privacy and their human rights, which seem to not matter. Time after time, these things are foisted upon the British public, and yet here we are, seeing the European Union dragging their feet, not doing the same. And you're exactly right, Patrick. This should be all of the food, all of the data that British voters need to say, enough. We've taken loads of Ukrainians, we've taken loads of people from Hong Kong, we've done more than our fair share with Afghan, genuine terror zones where people are fleeing war zones. We've more than shouldered our lot, and yet we're also expected to endlessly be the recipient of economic migrants. It simply has to stop.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, we only have to look not that far, just across the channel to Calais, Martin, don't we? Because you go, oh, gosh, look at them, living in terrible conditions over there. All right, well, whose fault's that? I'm sorry, well, it's either their own or the French government's, isn't it? And they want to come here because we'll shove them up in 4-star hotels.
Yeah, and the reason they're kind of camped under tarpaulin in Calais is because the French don't roll out the red carpet the way we do. You know, care for Calais are out there, giving them blankets, giving them food, coaching them on how to best attain asylum over here. Lawyers are out there, journalists have been out there reported on this, MPs have been out there reported on this, and there's a precise reason they want to come to our country, and you're right, public services, free accommodation, free meals, and as Nigel Farage exposed on his show, many of these asylum seekers living at taxpayers' expense, full expense, are also working in the black economy, in car washes, places like that. We've been absolutely taken for a ride, and stories like this today need to be the moment where British voters rise up and say, enough of this already, because you're expecting us to be an endless sponge. At the same time, you're not pulling your weight.
Martin, look, thank you, mate. That was fantastic stuff. A strong start to this hour. Martin Daubney there, GB News presenter, contributor, former MEP, very popular in the inbox. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. It's not just that we're doing more and that we're kinder and we're more benevolent and we appear to care more about people's human rights and the numbers, etc., than our European friends. It's also the fact that we have people like the Archbishop of Canterbury piping up saying we need to throw our arms around the world. I'm sorry, but where's all this money coming from? How much can we dish out to everybody? And at what point? I wouldn't mind it as well. But look at what's going on in Ukraine. And we've stepped forward there as well. What's the EU really done there? It took them a long time. I think Germany just sent some helmets at the start of this particular conflict. If they'd have had it their way, Putin would have had Ukraine and it'd be on into Europe. You can get loads more on this story on our website. Simply head to gbnews.com, where you will find the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. And the controversy over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages is rumbling on. Seriously now, could Boris Johnson go to jail? Would that be a stitch-up as well? And could this story pose big problems for Rishi Sunak? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
News channel.
This is Boston, or at least a part of it anyway.
What we voted for has backfired.
You don't see many locals about anymore.
Do you feel as though you've got what you asked for?
No, not at all.
From my point of view, yes. From a business point of view.
This was to campaign to get a referendum.
Just to get a referendum. We need people like Nigel to grab it. Come on, lead the country.
They tell us at elections what they want us to hear, but they never actually really mean it.
We're proud to be GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. In a few moments' time, I will speak to a man who could be responsible for getting Prince Harry deported from the United States. And I will talk about the airline that's going to weigh more than 10,000 passengers. Are we heading towards a situation where some people will be told they're too fat to fly? But ministers have been accused of a COVID inquiry cover-up after former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's WhatsApps have apparently mysteriously vanished, with the Cabinet Office claiming they no longer had the material. Well, Labour Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, here we go, has accused the government of delaying tactics and having much to hide. This, of course, comes after yesterday's inquiry chair Baroness Hallett agreeing to extend the original 4 p.m. deadline to tomorrow. So, by this time tomorrow, on this very show, the clock will tick down to 4 p.m, and we'll have to see. We'll have to see whether or not these WhatsApps, etc., have been handed over. I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, what's going on here? Are they actually trying to cover something up, and who could be responsible for it?
Well, it's a story of many, many twists and turns. Yesterday, the Cabinet Office gave several different reasons, different excuses, really, over why it was unable to hand over Boris Johnson's unredacted messages from that COVID period. One of the reasons they gave was that it would undermine collective responsibility, i.e. ministers have a right to be able to argue robustly with each other behind closed doors, and they also have a right to be able to present a united front to the public. That's how our democracy works. That's how government works in this country. That's the government top lawyer James Eadie's argument. They've also argued, bizarrely, after saying that there was no reason to hand over these documents, that it would be undermining of the way the government works. They've also now said that actually they don't have these documents at all. Well, which is it? Is it that they can't hand them over because they don't believe it would be right to hand it over, or is it that they don't have the documents at all? Well, they're going to have to find an answer to that question, because Lady Hallett, who's leading the COVID inquiry, has said either she wants to see those documents on her desk at 4 p.m. tomorrow, or she wants to see a written statement of truth, as it's called, from a senior civil servant, bearing witness to the fact that they don't have the documents at all. And if she receives neither of those, she will go nuclear and take this to court, potentially. She says that the government could be breaking criminal law by refusing to hand over these documents, and she's prepared to take them to court over it. Now, from where I'm standing this afternoon, it is beginning to look as though it is going to get to that stage. It doesn't look as though a senior civil servant is going to come forward with this statement of truth, and nor does it look as though Boris Johnson's team are about to hand over those documents. So it really could go to court. Well, what happens then? Lord Sumption, a very eminent and well-respected former High Court judge, has said that he thinks the government would lose the case, which would really be quite something. So we're all waiting on tenterhooks for tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, but we really could see the former Prime Minister being taken over to court. Could Rishi Sunak also be implicated in this? Apparently, Number 10 have refused to say whether or not he's been asked to hand over his documents and WhatsApp messages from that period when he was Chancellor, so it's not quite clear. But he could be mixed up in it too.
Olivia, thank you. Olivia Rutley, GB News' political reporter. Watch this space. I'm going over now, though, to a man who's always got strong views. His former Labour advisor, John McTiernan. John, great to have you on. Thank you very much. I'm reading an article here that says Boris Johnson's latest brush with the law could see him fined up to £1,000 or even facing a prison sentence of up to 51 weeks. Do you think Boris will go to prison if he doesn't hand his WhatsApps over?
Well, I thought that his people were saying he wanted his WhatsApps handed over and he couldn't understand why it was the Cabinet Office were trying not to hand them over. This does have a very, very funny feeling to it, doesn't it? The government must have read the Inquiries Act 2005 when they appointed an inquiry. The Inquiries Act gives such great powers to the chairman, and it's called chairman in the legislation. The chairman of an inquiry can require you to attend, can require you to divulge. There are no words like relevant to. There are no words like may have to divulge. It's like it's real power. If you give an inquiry chairman the power, why didn't they expect this to happen? I think this is what's odd about it. I think Lord Sumption's right. Lord Sumption's right. There's no way around this law. This law is meant to be an inquiry, like the Chilcot inquiry, which sees everything.
Now, I actually don't really think this is necessarily about Johnson. I think this might be more about Sunak, because I suspect that there would be a lot more pressure on Boris Johnson to get these out. I think there's some stuff potentially in these messages that Rishi Sunak clearly feels would absolutely do for him at the next general election. Whether that's about stabbing Boris in the back, whether it's about stuff when he was Chancellor, I don't know. But I think this is more Rishi than Boris.
I think you're absolutely right. There's something there. And you look at it logically, is there anything more that could come out about Boris that would change anybody's mind about him? I don't think so. The person who's trying to defend their reputation will be the person at the heart of this. So the guy who's pretending to be squeaky clean, the guy who's pretending he's got nothing to do, not just with Boris Johnson, but nothing to do with the Tory party. Like, I'm Rishi Sunak, I'm the Prime Minister. Can I change things? I'm not going to talk about the people who made the problem because that's my party. I think this is definitely, Rishi is worried. Probably he doesn't know exactly what it is, but he just kind of knows that he was very close in all the decisions, and there's been lots of discussions, and it was a close escape, wasn't it, for Rishi when Matt Hancock's WhatsApps came out, that people focused really on Matt and then a bit on Boris. But I find it very interesting watching them Torch was going to find a reason not to hand stuff over. And look, come back to this. Lord Sumption is right. There's a fine and there are powers to be jailed. So which civil servant's going to go to jail for Rishi?
Well, this is it, I suppose, isn't it? Just a wider point, John. Is this quite a dangerous principle to set here? Because I'm not going to speak for you, but I dare say if anyone really trawled through every single WhatsApp message I'd ever sent to anyone, there's a chance I'd never work again. And I think that applies to most people, OK? And is this not going to kind of curtail the way that people in government talk to each other going forward? I mean, you've got to be able to communicate freely, and at times that's not pretty, is it?
Yeah, look, sure. The best way to communicate directly and as fruitfully as possible is to do it face-to-face. It's the laziness to do it by WhatsApp. It's like, go and see somebody in their office and tell them what you want to tell them, whether it's a secret, whether you want to tear a strip off them, whether you want to gossip about somebody. If people understood that WhatsApp messages, the emails, when you're in government, it's like writing a postcard and putting it in the post and hoping the postman doesn't read it. Someone's going to read what you wrote. And to be honest, I've been in a situation where all my emails were looked at because I went through the Cash for Peerages inquiry. There's been lots of examples in the past, Chilcot, Cash for Peerages, all kinds of areas where advisors and ministers and civil servants should have learned what you write in government is not going to always be private. So if you want it private, put it on a post-it note, stick it on top of paper, and when someone's read it, they can throw away the post-it note. There's loads of ways of getting around this. It's sloppiness, it's unprofessionalism in the end. And the thing is, we are all going to enjoy it when Rishi's WhatsApps come out, aren't we?
Well, the thing is, it's going to be a non-stop game. We only have to look at the way that it's like, to paraphrase Eric Cantona, it's like, the seagulls following the trawler, isn't it, really? When anything comes out, I can completely understand the idea that it's going to be jumped on by anyone, in the left-wing media. It's going to be jumped on by anyone who's, and I think there are really some serious things people need to know about what the government knew about the efficacy of lockdowns, vaccines, etc. There are very pertinent questions there. I can see the other side of it, which is that actually, given the way that things have been leaked in the media in the past, I can see why they'd be worried. Anyway, John, this time tomorrow we'll know, won't we? John McTiernan there, former Labour advisor. Speak to you soon. All right. Loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. A pro-migrant charity that says that the United Kingdom's borders are systematically racist has been given more than £1 million by the government. Of course it has. Of course it has. And I will ask, if Prince Harry really going to be deported from the United States? I will talk to the man, one of the men who could be responsible for Prince Harry being deported back to Britain. But first, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines this hour: UK public officials who support Ukraine are being warned they are military targets. The threat comes from the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council. He's hit out at British officials, calling them goofy, adding that any UK military aid to Ukraine is seen as undeclared war against Russia. He said that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK can be considered a country at war. Rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption due to strike action by the ASLEF union. Members have walked out from today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday, causing major disruption to the FA Cup final at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. A Conservative think tank is suing the US government's Homeland Security Department to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records following revelations in his book that he took drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admission was documented in his US visa application. The case will be heard in a court in Washington in front of a US federal judge next Tuesday. And smoke from a wildfire in the Scottish Highlands is visible from space. The fire in the hills above Loch Ness is now in its 4th day. Satellite images from NASA show the smoke from the blaze, which covers just over 3 square miles, drifting towards the loch. 2 firefighters were injured during the incident. Fire engines and specialist groups remain at the scene. More on all of those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com. Back now to Patrick.
The government has given more than £1 million to a pro-migration charity advocacy group that believes that UK borders are systematically racist. Charity Commission accounts show that Paul Hamlin Foundation has received £1.36 million in government grants since 2020. The foundation has also given money to campaign groups such as Hope Not Hate and Detention Action, who's currently pursuing a court case against the government's Rwanda deportation plan. Good grief. It's got hallmarks, this, hasn't it, of the old Prevent scheme funding, where we managed to give money to people who gave a strong impression of people who might support the Taliban. Anyway, joining me now is GBNews' investigations reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, I'd love to say I was shocked by this, but I'm not. What's going on?
Well, it's a long track record now, a shameful record, many are saying, of the government funding its own enemies. Now, in the particular case of this foundation, it's supporting migration-related charities. In fact, the investigation from the Telegraph also found that one of the members of the Migration Advisory Committee had also been linked with this group and had some links involved here. Now, 1.36 million, it might sound like a small amount, but that can fund a lot of researchers and a lot of policy activism in the grand scheme of things that go against the government's agenda. Last year, we found a report, and it comes in the context of this, published by Conservative Way Forward, that found that billions was actually being spent on political activists who go against the government's agenda, particularly on equality, diversity and inclusion schemes. And I think this continues in that troubling agenda.
So taxpayers are already paying for legal aid for people who are known criminals who come over here and do disgraceful things, including, for example, members of grooming gangs, etc. We are now also paying for people who are trying to actively block our Rwanda policy, and we're paying groups who think that borders are racist.
And it's interesting that some of the language used by those being paid is not just the policy activism, it's also about the kind of language they use to describe the work that the government is doing. I mean, one of the groups, for example, Hope Not Hate, has claimed that the government's rhetoric on migration, at least not even the policies, they've claimed that it's moving towards the far right. So you have this extraordinary position now where the government is spending millions of pounds to people who are going to turn around and call them fascists.
But why?
Who are shutting borders.
I don't understand who makes these decisions.
No, government ministers and senior Tories have often complained about a failure within government whereby it gets caught up in this issue that Dominic Cummings called it the blob. Michael Gove has used the same term, whereby civil servants and bureaucrats within government get all this money, it gets filed away, and people lose track of it. When you spend so much government money, it takes good reporting to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very glad that this has come to light really, but it does seem completely self-defeating. It seems like an absolutely egregious waste of taxpayers' money, and for policies that are going against what a lot of people in this country want, what government's actual policy is as well. It just seems like we are quite literally, as you said there, funding our enemies, and it seems as though it's maybe coming from within and adds to this bonfire now of evidence, which appears to suggest that our civil service, again taxpayer-funded, who are supposed to facilitate the work of government, are indeed undermining it because of their woke ideological agenda.
And they're very, very extreme views as well. I mean, for all of the critics who claim that the government is extreme, they very rarely get the same criticism returned on them, despite one of the people receiving funding describing our immigration system as being rooted in colonial enterprise of a racially hierarchical world, which is extraordinary language to use about government policy.
Yeah, no, it really is. And like you said, this will go a huge way. So £1.36 million is not, by government standards, a huge amount of money. But for an organisation like a small group or a charity group, that is a massive amount of money and can go to doing a huge amount to spread their cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And the DCMS today, when they were aware of this story, they confirmed that charities are allowed to conduct this kind of political campaigning as long as it's not party political. So the current charity rules mean that they can receive all this money and conduct very extreme messaging with taxpayers' money. Now, a lot of people have called that into question. A lot of Tory MPs today have done the same. Sir John Hayes actually calling for the Migrant Advisory Committee, the Migration Advisory Committee, to be abolished because he described it as a new Labour quango, unelected bureaucrats deciding our migration using this sort of work, and causing a lot of trouble today in some Tory wings.
Charlie, thank you very much. Charlie Peters there, GBNews Investigates reporter. Today on the show, so far, we have been revealing about the way that the European Union treats asylum seekers compared to us. We are very much the good guys in all of this. But of course, you don't get that, do you, if you digest most of the usual media types and what you hear from these activists. We've also been revealing, as you've just heard, that the taxpayers, you, me, everyone we know, are funding groups who are deliberately going against government policy when it comes to migration. What on earth are we playing at? Who is making these decisions? It is absolute madness. GB Views and GBnews.com. But here's a question for you. Should fat people have to pay more to fly on a plane? You heard. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. There's some big breaking news. Notebooks and WhatsApp messages belonging to Boris Johnson have been handed to the Cabinet Office in full and unredacted form. That is according to a spokesman for the former Prime Minister. The spokesman says the Cabinet Office has been asked to urgently disclose it to the COVID-19 inquiry. We're going to have more on this at 5 p.m. I just want to read that again. There's some big news, OK? Notebooks and WhatsApp messages belonging to Boris Johnson have now been handed to the Cabinet Office in full and unredacted form. That is according to a spokesperson for the former Prime Minister. And the spokesman says that the Cabinet Office has been asked to urgently disclose it to the COVID-19 inquiry. Now, this actually is a fascinating development. So a spokesperson for Boris Johnson is saying that they've given everything in full and unredacted form. And if that then isn't passed on, that would imply the implication on this. Again, we will have more on this at 5 p.m. as more information comes out. But the initial implication of this, from where I'm sitting, would be that it will be up to Rishi Sunak and the Cabinet Office if they decide to not pass that on. And that, again, would imply that it's maybe those people who are more worried about what's in those than Boris Johnson. But we will have to wait for more detail on all of that, of course. Now, to a story I've been talking about throughout the show. Will Prince Harry be deported from the United States? A US court will hear an appeal from a conservative think tank over Harry's immigration records, following revelations in his book, Where, that he took a load of drugs. Niall Gardner of the Heritage Foundation tweeted that his organisation's suit will be heard next week. Harry knows a thing or two about suits, doesn't he? The Heritage Foundation is trying to find out if the revelations that the Duke of Sussex took cocaine, cannabis and magic mushrooms were documented in his visa application. Past drug use can be grounds for an application being denied. I'm delighted to say that Niall joins me now. Niall, what on earth are you playing at? We'd got rid of Harry.
Patrick, thanks very much for having me on the show today. And of course, the last thing I think the British people want is Prince Harry going back to the United Kingdom. But the issue, of course, really is whether or not Prince Harry was honest with his US immigration application. And we want to establish whether or not Prince Harry was absolutely truthful with regard to his extensive drug use that he admitted to in Spare, and also whether or not he was given preferential treatment. And so a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Is presiding over a hearing next Tuesday, which will examine whether or not there should be expedited processing for the request with regard to the Freedom of Information Act. So it will be a very significant hearing because if the judge does indeed offer an opinion which supports the expedited processing of the Freedom of Information request, this puts significant pressure upon the Biden administration to take the request very seriously. So far, they've been stonewalling the request. And if indeed it is the case that Prince Harry lied on his application, that, of course, is a very, very serious offence. And in such an instance, certainly the individual would be asked to leave the United States.
So what you want to get in your hands is proof as to whether or not Harry said when he was applying for a visa he's done cocaine, cannabis, magic mushrooms, as has been revealed in his book Spare. You feel the need to be able to see that.
Yeah, there's a clear public interest in having Harry's immigration records released. And immigration law should be applied equally to everyone who applies for a United States visa, and that includes members of the royal family, such as Prince Harry. And it is vitally important in our view that US immigration law is applied effectively and equally, and that the rule of law is enforced fully here. So far, the Biden administration has been stonewalling the request, which we view as absolutely unacceptable. And it's also our view that, if Prince Harry has nothing to hide, well, he should support the release of his immigration records.
But Niall, do you want to go down in history as the man who brought Harry and Meghan back to Britain? Oh, no, obviously he doesn't. Obviously he doesn't. No. I think we'll try and get Niall back up. That was an unfortunate point, of course, for Niall to freeze that. But look, I mean, this is the reality of it, OK? So seriously, we might be about to be seeing Prince Harry getting deported. Whether or not he would just go somewhere else like Canada, I don't know. Are we able to get Niall back or not yet? No, not yet. We'll move it on. We'll talk to Niall again about this. But thank you very much. Of course, that is Niall Gardner there. Look, he's a good guy, Niall. He's the Heritage Foundation, does a lot of work over there. But, yeah, I'm not sure there'll be a huge amount of support, will there, for Prince Harry coming back into Britain. Now, we are all familiar with the rules around weighing our luggage when we go on holiday. But Air New Zealand is taking flying rules to a new high. Yes, new boarding procedures from the airline involve weighing not just the suitcases, but the holiday maker as well. Hand over your passport and pop on the scales like a zoo animal. How are people going to feel about this? Let's speak now to former presenter of Fat Families and all-round fan favourite, it's Steve Miller. Steve, thank you very much. Should fat people have to pay more to fly?
Well, the answer to that is a resounding yes, and there is an intelligence behind it. Let me explain. When we're talking about motivating a nation to lose weight, we've got to have the carrot and we've got to have a bit of stick. Both motivational forces are important. In the UK, we're pretty good at the carrot. It's all very nicey-nicey, but we're pretty useless when it comes to being straight talking and using shock tactics such as this to actually encourage people to lose and manage their weight. In addition to that, and I say this as someone that supports people to lose and manage their weight, if I am on an aeroplane and I'm taking a seat and someone is spilling into my seat because they are too fat, it makes me quite uncomfortable. And also, it just makes the whole flight uncomfortable. And so, therefore, they're taking my space. And therefore, they should be paying, in my opinion, for 2 seats. I think that's common sense. I think it's fair. I think it encourages people to take responsibility. And I think those people that are suggesting that the airlines should widen their seats are talking nonsense, because that would be completely unfair to responsible people that look after themselves, keep their weight sensibly, because they'd have to pay more if the seats were widened.
No, I don't mind admitting, I have done numerous times, I struggle with my weight. I put weight on very quickly. I don't always regulate my diet. I've recently lost a bit of weight to try and raise some money for a mental health charity. So I'm not in any way trying to degrade people who are grossly overweight. But there does appear to be a basic question of fairness here, I think, that if you can get fined money for having a suitcase that's a couple of pounds over the allotted weight limit, and then 10-ton Timmy gets on behind you and you think, well, he's paying the same for a ticket. There does appear to be a basic sense of fairness. You don't think it would, I don't know, shame people at the airport, do you? I mean, is there the risk of that?
I do. I absolutely do. But let me be very clear. When it comes to fat shaming, there is constructive fat shaming and non-constructive fat shaming. Non-constructive fat shaming is when we're teasing everyone on the street. That's wrong. Constructive fat shaming is where you're putting your foot down a little bit. And yes, I suppose I could call it chub class, couldn't I? That could be the name of it. But at the end of the day, The great news is, as a nation, for all of us, it is possible to lose weight. There is nothing stopping us if we're too fat. I've done it, you've done it, the nation can do it. And actually, it's just, as you say, just logical common sense fairness, that if people are spilling onto your territory, then they should be paying for that territory.
Yeah, I agree completely. I do think that potentially all of this is being slightly undermined by this idea that fat is beautiful. And again, I don't want anyone out there to think that, to feel like I'm saying that they're necessarily ugly. But I think in some adverts, we're seeing the active promotion of obesity. And that causes huge health problems.
Oh, completely, and I agree with you totally. Body positive in its kind of underlying message is true. We should accept people no matter who they are, fat, thin, gay, straight, black, white, and so on. It is important to do that. But let me be blunt about it. Fat is not beautiful. Fat as a substance is not beautiful. It harms you. It can potentially kill you. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, dementia now is related to being too fat. All of those things. So we do actually need a bit of tough love, shock tactics, just like that. And if we're going to call it chub class, so be it.
Look, I found genuinely that one of the best things that is, whenever I get very hungry now, one of the best things is to look at Fat Trick Christys, his old pictures, where I look like I've been inflated by 19 pints of Guinness and all sorts, and that was usually the case, to be fair. And I find that as a good reminder for me. You have got, Steve, a couple of decent tactics. I follow you on Twitter. I see it where you say the odd thing like, well, if you really want that cake, then eat it naked and have a look down at yourself while you're eating it and see if you really want it. Just little things like that.
You're absolutely right, and that comes back to motivation as well. Because if you're about to, we all crave food. I love me grub, right? And if I'm inappropriately craving food, I will perhaps look at my old fat photo and then, have a good old word with myself. It's not just about completely beating yourself up, because at the same time, you can actually reward yourself mentally with the breakthrough that you've achieved by eating sensibly. So yes, and weight loss and weight management, it's all about the head. Mindset and motivation is key. People know what to eat to be slimmer. The problem in the UK is we've just made it glorious to be fat, and we've encouraged people to be quite lazy in the head.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. As ever, always an absolute treat. Steve Miller there, who's the former presenter of Fat Families, a fan favourite here. Look, I suppose, should you, in the light of what Air New Zealand are potentially going to do, weigh the passengers as well as their luggage? It would make sense, to be honest with you, would it not? It would make sense. I mean, given that you get fined if you've got a wet towel in your suitcase and, someone waddles in behind you. But a reminder of this hour's big breaking news: Boris Johnson's notebooks and WhatsApp messages have been handed to the Cabinet Office now in full and unredacted form. I will have much more on this very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Good evening, it's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, action-packed final hour. The breaking news, Boris has handed over in full and unredacted forms his diaries and his WhatsApp messages. They are now saying it's over to the Prime Minister in the Cabinet Office to give them to the COVID-19 inquiry. The ball is in Rishi's court. Actually, is it Rishi Sunak who's trying to hide something and not Boris Johnson? But here's another revelation for you. The EU is treating asylum seekers worse than Britain. So anybody who thought that our Rwanda scheme was a big racist con, frankly, back in your box. We're also going to be talking about this. New powers for our police force to just stop oil. Fantastic, if you ask me. I'm going to be dissecting what they really mean, but it's good news for road users, especially ahead of Saturday's FA Cup final, which no doubt will be a disaster because of Just Stop Oil. We're also going to be talking about this. Is AI a risk to humanity? On the front pages of a lot of newspapers today, is it going to kill us all? And finally, yes, speed limits. 20 miles an hour. As somebody who's recently been done for speeding, I've got some skin in the game here. But is this just a way of grinding even more money out of the road user? Or are 20 mile an hour zones actually a good thing for public safety? Patrick Christys on GB News. That email address is gbviews@gbnews.com. What do you make of this latest Boris Johnson development? That's been breaking. We'll break that again at the top of this hour. I'm also going to be asking you whether or not you seriously think that we are actually treating asylum seekers and refugees worse than the European Union, in light of the information I'm about to give to you. gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, though, headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Well, as you've been hearing, some breaking news within the last 15 minutes or so. Boris Johnson's notebooks and his WhatsApp messages have been handed over to the Cabinet Office. A spokesman for the former Prime Minister says he's asked for the full and unredacted details to be disclosed urgently to the COVID inquiry. That's after the Cabinet Office previously argued the material was irrelevant. Downing Street is denying claims of a cover-up. The government has until tomorrow to hand over the evidence by the afternoon. Well, the main news today, a former Russian president has warned that UK public officials who support Ukraine are legitimate military targets, he says. Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council, says any UK military aid to Kyiv represents an undeclared war against Russia, calling British officials goofy and an eternal enemy. Medvedev says that under Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK can be considered a country at war. Former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon told GB News the comments aren't something to be concerned about.
Know their threats of nuclear attack for the last 14 months have been, a completely vanishingly thin red line. So I think they're getting pretty desperate. They know that the counteroffensive is coming, and they know that ourselves, the Brits, are providing a lot of hardware, a lot of intelligence, and they think by threatening our MPs, they're going to change their mind. It might work in Russia, it won't work in this country.
Now, rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption today due to strike action by the ASLEF union. Members have walked out today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday, causing major problems for football fans travelling to London for the FA Cup final at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. All tariffs have now been removed on goods exported from the UK to Australia and New Zealand. It's the first trade deal with the countries to come into effect in a post-Brexit negotiation. Shipments of British goods, such as signed Beano comics, are among the first to be sent under the new arrangements. It also means that red tape will be slashed for digital trade and work visas. Minister for International Trade, Nigel Huddleston, says the deal will boost both goods and services.
It will benefit every single region and nation of the UK, and it will add billions and billions of pounds to the UK economy, which surely is a good thing. It will make it easier for British producers to export because we're removing tariffs overseas, and also easier as well because we're easing, for example, the border checks. And also it's not just for goods, it's services as well that we're able to support overseas. So it's a really good news story for the British economy. It'll add to economic activity and add to wages in the UK. So what's not to like?
A Conservative think tank is suing the US Department of Homeland Security to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records following revelations in his book Spare that he took drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admission was documented in his US visa application. The case will be held in a court in Washington, D.C. in front of a US federal judge next Tuesday. The hearing will be open to the press. Here, the Labour Party donor Dale Vince says he'll double his donations to the environmental protest group Just Stop Oil. His comments come amid controversy in the Labour Party over it also receiving donations from him. Tory leaders have called for the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, to return the funds from the donor. But Labour's Nick Thomas-Simons told BBC News that his party has been extremely clear on their views and that Mr Vince is perfectly entitled to give money to other causes. Customers on prepayment meters are being urged to avoid missing out on £400 worth of support with their energy bills. All households were eligible for the government's Energy Bills Support Scheme, which was paid in 6 instalments over the winter. But with £130 million still available to be claimed, households are being urged to redeem their vouchers before the deadline on the 30th of June. Smoke from a wildfire in the Highlands of Scotland is apparently visible from space. The fire in the hills above Loch Ness is now in its 4th day, and satellite images from NASA show the smoke from the blaze, which covers just over 3 square miles, drifting towards the loch. 2 firefighters have been injured during the incident, and fire engines and specialist groups remain on the scene. This is GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
Well, we start with the huge breaking news that we brought to you just a short time ago. Notebooks and WhatsApp messages belonging to Boris Johnson have been handed to the Cabinet Office in full and unredacted form. Now, this is the interesting bit for me. A spokesman for the former Prime Minister, so a spokesman for Boris Johnson, says that the Cabinet Office has been asked to urgently disclose them to the COVID-19 inquiry. That, I think, is fascinating, because what he is saying there is, we've given it over to you. It's your job now to give this on to the inquiry. Why would they have to say that, do you think? Do you think, maybe a bit of pushback on whether or not actually it's Rishi Sunak or the Cabinet Office who feel as though they have more to hide from this than Boris Johnson? Here to give us the very latest is GB News' political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, thank you. Very interesting statement, this, from Boris Johnson's people.
Absolutely. Well, it's a bit of a grenade from Boris Johnson, really, but it shouldn't actually come as too much of a surprise. Boris Johnson has maintained all along that he would be perfectly happy to hand over his WhatsApp documents in unredacted form to the inquiry, and simply said that officials hadn't yet asked him. So although this has been painted as a Boris Johnson has got something to hide story in some quarters, all along what it's actually been about is the Cabinet Office refusing to hand over all of the details, which of course begs the question, why? If it's not Boris Johnson the Cabinet Office is protecting, then who is it? Which sitting minister, one has got to assume, doesn't want the COVID inquiry to see his or her WhatsApp messages? Is it Rishi Sunak? The fact that Boris Johnson, who obviously has a pretty bad relationship with Rishi Sunak now, is urging the Cabinet Office to hand over his own information suggests perhaps that Boris Johnson has a bit of a grudge against whoever it is that would rather the inquiry didn't see their WhatsApp messages. So this story has just reached a whole new phase. It's not about the former Prime Minister anymore. It's about a sitting government minister. We just don't know who that is yet.
Look, I'm going to stick with this for a second, Olivia, because this is a really important thing to drill down on. I am very pleased, genuinely, that here on this show and others on GB News, we were calling this early doors and saying that it doesn't actually really look like it's Boris Johnson who's got a huge amount to hide here. There is something else going on. There are other people who are clearly very nervous about what these WhatsApp messages will be revealed. And you can imagine why. Is it something to do with vaccines? Is it something to do with lockdown? Is it something to do with the economic impact? Is it something to do with wanting Boris Johnson out of office? All of those things could do for people who were front and centre at the time, and not least Rishi Sunak.
Well, absolutely. It makes life pretty difficult for the Prime Minister. As you say, it never quite added up, the theory that this was all about Boris Johnson having something to hide. Boris Johnson has always said that he's willing to hand it over, and yet the Cabinet Office have gone to extraordinary lengths, really, to avoid handing over this material. At first, they claimed that they couldn't hand it over because it was irrelevant, and there was no right for them to hand over irrelevant information to the COVID inquiry. Then they claimed that they didn't have the information at all, that the WhatsApp messages simply weren't in their possession. Well, that story has obviously been overturned by Boris Johnson now handing over these documents in full. They've also claimed that government's top lawyer, James Eadie, has claimed that these messages could perhaps undermine government collective responsibility. Now, this is quite interesting, actually, because government collective responsibility essentially means that the Cabinet gives one unified voice to the people. So the Cabinet agrees behind closed doors what it thinks about a particular issue, and you will never hear any dissent among Cabinet ministers on a serious issue pertaining to government business. But behind closed doors, ministers are encouraged to have robust conversations where they strongly disagree with each other, as we saw from Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages published in The Telegraph. Matt Hancock and Rishi Sunak disagreed a lot over how far to push the lockdown. But of course, during the pandemic, they would both come up on news rounds and say exactly the same thing. So perhaps this is the issue. Perhaps it's government arguments behind the scenes during these times which could be about to explode.
Absolutely. And I would not put it past Boris or the Tory party if the revelations here were shocking and it plays into the hands of Boris Johnson being stitched up and this being some kind of witch hunt. Maybe it's the start of the return of Boris Johnson, but I won't get to you to speculate on that, Olivia. Olivia Utley there, our political reporter in Westminster. Fascinating. The ball is in Rishi Sunak's court, the ball is in Downing Street's court and the Cabinet Office court, and Boris Johnson has slammed it in there by saying, here you go, lads, here's all of my WhatsApps, here's all of my diary entries, it's over to you now. What are you hiding? Fascinating stuff. And may I remind you that on this very show tomorrow, that deadline passes at 4 p.m, and we'll be giving you all of the latest breaking news as this handover of information for the COVID-19 inquiry is due to take place. Boris Johnson no longer, by the sounds of things, is being threatened with prison action for not handing it over. Who has what to hide? That's what I want to know. But now, though, to a shocking report that accuses the EU of the staggering neglect of Afghan refugees. Only 271 Afghans were resettled in the EU in 2022 last year, and the charity, the International Rescue Committee, says many asylum seekers are living in prison-like conditions on Greek islands. The reason I'm highlighting this story is because of the utter hypocrisy of it. We, in this country, are treating asylum seekers better than in the European Union. And for all of this talk and this guff about Rwanda being some horrible big racist scheme and the way that we treat people, let's just have it right. In Greece at the moment, for example, people are put on islands in squalid detention centres, given very little to no access to public services, kicked out of those sometimes within 30 days and made homeless. In this country, you can enter illegally via a small dinghy. We'll put you in a school even though we apparently know you're an adult. We'll put you up in a hotel at the taxpayer's expense. We'll pay your legal expenses as well. And by the sounds of it as well, we won't deport you. It is absolute madness. Oh, and we might even build you a new house as well. So there we go. GB News presenter, contributor and former MEP Martin Daubney has accused the EU of double standards.
Don't forget, we are the closed-minded, closed borders, little Englanders who drew up the drawbridge to the world when we Brexited, and open borders, so beloved of the European Union, were absolutely central to their bloc's dream. And yet here we are. The reality hits home. It is they who drew up the drawbridge. They who are locking people out, fleeing war zones, while at the same time saying to us that we should openly accept as many economic migrants as we can possibly house and beyond, who are traipsing through several European Union member states before they even get to us.
It's no wonder they all want to come here, is it? Because we are objectively treating them better than they are on the continent. The UK gets criticised for its treatment of migrants all the time, but a little later this hour, in light of those revelations, I'm asking this question. I'm having a debate on it. Are we actually the good guys? I think we know the answer, don't we? But in the meantime, you get loads more on that story on our website. Simply head to gbnews.com, where you will find the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. But get a load of this. Are the days of Just Stop Oil ruining people's lives finally coming to an end? 10 activists were arrested at Parliament Square this morning, but now the government is trying to crack down on the protest group. It's ahead of the FA Cup final at Wembley on Saturday, where so-called sprinter stewards are being brought in to deal with any potential disruption. I cannot wait to see Usain Bolt clobber one of those orange-clad numpties. But with me now is the former Met detective Peter Blexley. Peter, great stuff. Great to have you on the show. So these potential new powers could see, as well, police officers being empowered to treat a slow walk through the street as more of a major disruption and to be able to do something about it. Because, Peter, the FA Cup final on Saturday, Manchester United, Manchester City, we all know what's going to happen. Just Stop Oil are going to plonk themselves on the M6 somewhere and cause absolute carnage. We need to be able to interrupt that.
Yes, and I've been making the case for many, many weeks, in fact months, that there is already sufficient legislation to deal with these idiots, and it's just been timid policing that unfortunately has failed to act properly. Well, if that means that there has to be new legislation that basically hands it to the police on a plate, and by that I mean the new laws, so that they will act, then so be it. Although a slight note of caution, there is some opposition to this law as it's being passed through Parliament. Many of those in the House of Lords are objecting. But if finally the police have it there in front of them in black and white and act robustly and as effectively as they did on the Coronation Day to deal with any disruption, then I think many millions of us will welcome that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we understand here at GB News is that the government could use these Henry VIII powers, which mean that it can do as much as possible to bypass opposition in the House of Lords, where, of course, the Conservatives are in a minority, and therefore just get this through. And what it will mean is that instead of having to look at the community impact of a protest, and that means like the localised community. So, for example, if you plonk yourself on the M6 with a banner or on a bridge there, the police might look at it and go, well, not a lot of people live just off the M6, and so this isn't affecting a community, but it looks at people travelling into other communities and treats it as more of an organic situation, which I think we all agree really is what's needed. It comes today as well, by the way, that the main funder of Just Stop Oil, Dale Vince, is saying that it'll double any donations that they get. That money, one would imagine, you know, some of the money anyway is going towards the Labour Party. He's donating to the Labour Party, which is absolutely staggering when you look at Labour taking money off Just Stop Oil in that way. One would have thought they'd have to hand that back, although, of course, they won't. But, yes, the police maybe can now feel more empowered, Peter, in a way that you argue they should have been from the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I've repeatedly said it. They do have sufficient laws. They just don't have the courage, or didn't have the courage, to what we would say in the old days, give it a run, arrest someone, put them in front of the court and see if you can set a judicial precedent. However, if they suddenly get this legislation and they do act far more robustly, let's face it, they've got experts in climbing, so they can go up the gantries, they can go up the Dartford Bridge. They've got experts in removing these people, however they chain concrete or affix themselves to roads, railways, any other kind of infrastructure. They just need to have the will, the courage, the determination to do it, and do it properly and swiftly.
Now, Peter, just with a preemptive hat on for Saturday, like I said, it's the FA Cup final. And the reason why I think this poses a unique risk for Just Stop Oil is because all of the fans, really, jokes aside about where many Manchester United fans live, of course, all of the fans, in theory, are coming from Manchester to Wembley. OK, so really, Just Stop Oil know that they can just block an arterial route from Manchester into London and they would cause absolute outrage. That's before we've even thought about them getting on the pitch at Wembley, for goodness sake. So what kind of measures can the police take preemptively to stop these numpties getting involved?
Well, quite possibly, and I couldn't, of course, condone violence in any way, shape or form. Perhaps the police could look the other way if there happened to be rows and rows of buses containing football supporters who are not getting to the FA Cup final. Maybe the police would just look the other way, let the football fans off the buses and see if they are robust in removing Just Stop Oil protesters from the M1 or the M6.
I mean, I would shudder to think what would happen when Just Stop Oil meets Liam Gallagher, actually, who no doubt will be on his way to the FA Cup final. Peter, thank you very much. Strong stuff. You love to see it. Peter Blexley there, former Met detective. I suspect, look, they tried it on at the rugby. They tried it on at the snooker. I do not fancy Just Stop Oil's chances if they are trying to stop however many 100,000 Mancunians from getting to Wembley to see their team, hopefully the red team, win the FA Cup. But anyway, I don't want to alarm you. Yes, that's right. Why would I want to do such a thing like that? But one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence says that it could wipe out humanity. I am Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel. It's the end of the world.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, I'm Patrick Christys, and today we're going to address an issue that's vitally important in our rapidly evolving world. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence, or AI. Now, I'm no Luddite. In fact, I'm all for embracing new technologies, and I understand the immense potential of AI. But there's another side to this coin, a side that warrants some scrutiny. You see, when we talk about AI, we're not just discussing a set of algorithms that tells us weather or keeps our calendar in check. No, we're addressing complex systems with the capability to carry out tasks that were once exclusive to human intelligence. So here's the question that we need to pose. Are we, in our pursuit of technological advancement, surrendering too much control? There's a risk in designating entities that can think, strategize, and possibly even survive better than us. How do we navigate the ethical and moral implications of machines that could make decisions that impact us all? We must also consider the economic impact, and let's not forget about privacy, our right to live without the fear of prying eyes. The potential of AI is immense, but we must proceed with caution. We need to strike a balance that encourages innovation without compromising our humanity, our livelihoods and our privacy. So let's step into the future, but on our terms. That monologue was written on my phone by AI. So it wasn't me. Yeah. Earlier on today, we just asked ChatGPT to do a monologue in the style of Patrick Christys about the dangers of AI. And that's what it wrote in under a minute, which proves, if proof was needed, that I am dispensable. So there we go. And, oh, is that the boss on the phone? No. Anyway, so joining me now is University of Oxford professor Andrew Briggs. Well, Andrew, I mean, thus ends my career, OK? So AI is an amazing thing, but as we can see, it can basically do everybody's jobs. I am, concerned that I'm looking at the front of 3 national newspapers today, and it says, AI pioneers fear extinction. Are we all going to die?
Patrick, thank you very much. And I was very impressed by your experiment with ChatGPT. It is very convincing, isn't it? And people like me who create AI or machine learning, as we tend to call it within the trade, have a responsibility to do our science in a morally load-bearing way. And it is absolutely amazing the pace at which machine learning has accelerated, coming to the forefront with ChatGPT and, as you say, the statement that's in the newspapers today. Hitherto, what we've done is we've programmed computers to do a task for us, maybe keeping your bank records or whatever. The change that's taken place, the reason why we call it machine learning, is that we now program the machines to learn how to do a task. And at the moment, the goal that we set, what we call the score function, is decided by humans. And the reason all this is becoming so prominent is that the fear is that the day may come when machines are so much more intelligent than humans, however you actually measure that, that they're able to set their own goals, as it were, to reset the goals that had been set for them by humans. And that's what the current discussion is all about.
In what ways could they destroy humanity? Because one thing that I don't get is, OK, just because you've got this creation of something here that, as you've expertly articulated there, can far surpass human intelligence, might set its own goals. Why would the goal of that thing ever to be to, I don't know, set off all of our nuclear weapons or attack us in some way? How could it actually happen?
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. Right. But one way of thinking about it is this, that, you may say you've got nothing against ants, you don't want to hurt ants, you don't intend any harm to ants. But actually, if you're trying to put up a garden shed and there happens to be an ant's nest in the way, you have no qualms about destroying the ant's nest in order that you can put up your garden shed. So you can see the analogy. It's not a perfect one. But if these machines get to the point where they might be setting their own goals, they might or might not have anything against humans. They might just not care very much what happens to humans. That's the sort of fear that people are worrying about. And I suppose we should put this in context. Not so long ago, a number of people were thinking about this. My own colleague at Oxford, others like Max Tegmark and so on were writing books about it. And at the time it seemed very far off. It seemed, like science fiction, or at least, the stuff of philosophical debates. I think what's happened is that the progress has now accelerated so much that it might not be so far off after all.
But just to cut across, Andrew, if that's all right.
Something else to say, yes.
Yeah, no, just because we do have a bit of press time, and I want your view on this. And more than 350 of the world's most distinguished experts in artificial intelligence, including the creator of ChatGPT, have warned that it could, basically make humanity extinct. Can we put any restriction on this now, or is the cat out of the bag?
No, the cat's not out of the bag. It's not too late to act, and I'm very glad that these senior people are acting and speaking out. Doesn't mean it'll be easy. It's a global problem. It's an international problem. But if we act now, we may be in time. If we leave it too long, we may be too late. And that's why they're speaking out now. That's why I'm glad that they're speaking out now, and it's why I'm a signatory.
No, Andrew, this is, amazing. I would love to have your intellect and insight, actually. I'm assuming that ChatGPT is just based off you, because you clearly have the brain the size of a planner. I'm a bit pressed for time, but I would love to chat to you again about this, hopefully before the world ends. There's Andrew Briggs there, who is University of Oxford professor and a signatory to this. It is terrifying stuff. I know I kind of say it with a smile on my face, but it's mainly because it all seems a bit weird, really. It just seems like we've watched sci-fi films and then created the very thing that they all told us was going to kill us all one day. But, yes, anyway, there we go. There's loads more still to come between now and 6 p.m. Let's keep it light. No, we won't. As the EU is slammed for its treatment of Afghan migrants, I'm going to ask if the UK are the good guys when it comes to asylum seekers. You will not believe the way that our European friends are actually treating people compared to us, and the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit are being blamed for a record number of motorists being caught speeding. I will ask whether or not they're actually a good or a bad thing, and I must admit, I've got some skin in the game when it comes to speeding tickets. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour, and it's some breaking news that Boris Johnson's notebooks and WhatsApp messages have been handed over to the Cabinet Office within the last hour. A spokesman for the former Prime Minister says he's asked for the full and unredacted details to be disclosed urgently to the COVID inquiry. That's after the Cabinet Office previously argued the material was irrelevant. Downing Street has denied claims of a cover-up. The government has until tomorrow afternoon to hand over the evidence. UK public officials who support Ukraine are being warned that they are military targets. The threat comes from the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council. He hit out at British officials, calling them goofy, adding that any UK military aid to Ukraine could be seen as an undeclared war against Russia. He said that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK is considered a country at war. Rail passengers across the UK are facing travel disruption due to strike action by the ASLEF union today. Members have walked out and are set to do so again on Saturday. And RMT union members are due to walk out Friday. That's going to cause major disruption to the FA Cup final at Wembley. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan accuses the government of not wanting a resolution, but the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. A Conservative think tank is suing the US government, Department of Homeland Security, to uncover Prince Harry's immigration records into the States following his records in his book, Spare That He Took Drugs. The Heritage Foundation wants to see the records to prove if the admission was documented in his US visa application. The case will be held in a court in Washington in front of a US federal judge, and that will take place next Tuesday. Those are your latest news headlines. You can get more on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
So a snapshot of today's markets then, and the pound buying you 2383 in terms of dollars and 1.1632 for euros. The price of gold, £1,589 and 11 pence for an ounce. FTSE 100 today closing at 7,446 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Yes, more now on this shocking report that's accused the EU of staggering neglect of Afghan refugees. Out of 270,000 Afghan refugees who require protection and housing, only 0.1% were resettled in the EU bloc last year. The charity, the International Rescue Committee, says many asylum seekers are staying in prison-like conditions on Greek islands. And actually, as well, even if they are given right to stay, often they're told you've got 30 days to get yourself out of here, find your own accommodation, find a job, otherwise you are made homeless. Realistically, if Britain was treating asylum seekers in the way that a lot of our European friends are, there would be mass hysteria and outrage. Joining me now to have it out is the former Minister for Europe for Labour, Dennis McShane, and the former Tory Cabinet Minister, Anne Widdecombe. And it's always ladies first on this show, so I will let you take it away. We're the good guys, aren't we?
Yes.
And the appalling thing is that the Afghan war was, of course, a NATO war. I know a lot of people think it was just Britain and America, but it wasn't. It was a NATO war. So all NATO was involved in that war, and therefore all those countries involved should, and apparently were once going to, take their share of the fallout in terms of the refugees. But whereas, and I don't think we did terribly well over the Afghan interpreters, and I've said that on this programme many, many times, and I think we did betray the interpreters, but we have taken many more refugees than other countries in Europe, something like 13,000 Afghans. So I don't think we're doing that badly when it comes to looking for our international obligations. I think we're doing quite well, minus the interpreters, which I think was appalling.
Dennis, if you tip up in Greece as a genuine Afghan asylum seeker, you get lobbed in a squalid detention centre on an island somewhere and given no access to public services or any provisions. In this country, you can rock up illegally on a boat, we'll put you in a 4-star hotel, we'll let you send your kids to school, and we might even build you a new house. We're the good guys.
I think I've always said Britain is generous, been generous to Hong Kong people, been generous to Ukrainian people. Greece's problem is simply it's got about 2,000 islands, of which 250 are inhabited, big ones like Crete, smaller, lovely ones like Santorini. And you can simply arrive on one of those, almost in a rowboat, fall off onto the beach, and then it's the Greeks' responsibility to look after you. And they say, we'd like to share this out because they're all coming mainly from Libya.
Germany's not accepted a single Afghan refugee from their quota of 1,000. Germany's a big country.
Germany has settled 262,000 Afghanistans, accepted them. What Germany, I imagine, I'm not speaking for Germany, people talk about the EU. The EU can sit up and say everybody should take their share, and everybody says, what? What? We're British. We're not taking your refugees. And the Germans say we've taken 260,000. Maybe that's enough. Try another country.
And when people pipe up and say our Rwanda scheme is horrible and it's racist and it goes against people's human rights, I mean, should we just point them in the direction of the way that the European Union is treating these people?
Well, actually, it's not a bad idea because the European Union is mistreating people who are genuine refugees. The people pitching up on our shores in the small boats are largely economic migrants who have absolutely no claim to be here at all. So there's an enormous moral difference. And I'm not going to say we're purer than pure because, as I say, you know, I've got the problem with the Afghan interpreters. But that aside, I think we have been an example to the rest of Europe on this one. Rwanda is for economic migrants abusing our system. It's not for people who helped us in a war.
Dennis, the European Union has absolutely lost the moral argument. They are the opposite of what they claim to be. The reason why everyone wants to come here is because, as we can see now, we are a shining beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak and dark European existence. We treat them better.
Germany took 1 million Syrian refugees.
How did that work out?
Well, it was unpopular in Germany. But why were they there? Because David Cameron decided a policy of regime change in Syria and helped destroy the state, with help from Putin and others for sure. And so every Syrian who could, if you'd been a Syrian, Patrick, if I'd been Syrian with children, whatever, we'd have got out of there like a shot. Germany took 1 million, we took hardly any. But you see, you talk about the EU, fair point, but actually every national government in Europe has got its own rules and its own policy. The Swedes are far more generous than the Germans. The Italians are in the firing line now. The French, they had to ban a visit by the French foreign minister because the French Home Secretary said that the Italians' immigration policy was a disgrace. So if you follow European politics, as I do, the little squabbles we have here are nothing to the big punch-ups in Europe.
Anne's getting very animated. Go on.
Well, I just laughed when I heard the mention of the French because we all know what the French have done about the small boats and we all know how they just take money and then do absolutely nothing for it. So I certainly, wouldn't look at the French as any sort of example at all as to how to treat refugees. And why do they try to escape from France to come over here? These economic migrants is because they know darn well that France will say no. But whereas if they come here, and they can arrange to disappear into the underground economy, they'll never be removed. They won't get that in France.
Dennis, the EU likes the phrase full regulatory alignment, and if we decided to do that, we wouldn't be allowing anyone coming in over a boat, we wouldn't be putting them up in four-star hotels, we wouldn't be building them new homes, we wouldn't be giving them access to our public services, would we?
Sure. I mean, the French take 4 times more refugees than we do.
They're massive a country, aren't they?
Well,
how big is France?
It's about twice our size, the same population. But you're absolutely right that this myth of the EU dictating to countries what to do, this has been blown apart by, I think, your own excellent reporting. It is completely different, the approach, say, in Greece. There have been some very ugly reports in the American press of the Greeks sort of pushing refugees back onto
There is a point there, and it is actually a very, very good one, which I think is something that people should be doing. Clearly, the main reason why I'm doing this report is to try to highlight the fact that we are actually treating people a lot better than the European Union. There's a moral argument there. I want to expose their hypocrisy. But it also does, I think, expose the absolute hypocrisy of our government leaders here who are saying, well, there's nothing that we can do about this. Well, hang on a minute. If those countries who are in the European Union are able to do, well, frankly, less for people than we are, why can't we?
Oh, well, we made that point endlessly while we were in the EU. Endlessly, we made that point. And there was no satisfactory answer to it at all. But, of course, the EU always falls apart and always squabbles amongst itself when there's an enormous pressure that is threatening it, as happened during COVID and the vaccinations. And they were all closing their borders, these free movement people, and arguing with each other and about who had the rights to it and trying to close the Irish border so that we couldn't get the vaccinations that we'd ordered and paid for. I mean, they always squabble amongst themselves. And this is a very good example of it, with them just going their own way when it suits them.
Well, it is, but I dare say quite a lot of people would actually rather that we were behaving like countries like Greece, because there is an active deterrent there, isn't there? And I hate to say it, but the deterrent there is if you go to Greece... I'm not saying we should reduce ourselves, by the way, to the lowest common denominator, but the deterrent about being an Afghan migrant in Greece, that you don't want to stay there, is because you get treated appallingly, isn't it? But there we go. Look, both of you...
No, Patrick, there is a big, big difference between an economic migrant and a genuine refugee. And people coming out of Afghanistan are largely the genuine refugees, many of whom actually actively helped us and America and other NATO countries during that war. They are different, and they should be treated
making that point.
Yeah, well, it's a moot point. The point really is, isn't it, though, that yes, they are, but they're still being treated terribly. Look, both of you, thank you very much. That's former Labour Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane, and the former Tory Cabinet Minister, Anne Widdecombe. Good. Enjoyed that discussion. Right. A record number of people were convicted of speeding last year. What kind of idiot would get done for speeding? Anyway, are motorists being used as cash cows, or do people just need to improve their driving? As you will find out, I am very much the latter. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Now, new figures show that the number of drivers convicted for speeding has reached an 8-year high. More than 230,000 motorists were prosecuted for exceeding the speed limit in England and Wales last year. That is a 16% increase on 2021. Motoring groups put this rise down to the growing number of 20-mile-per-hour speed limit zones in the UK. I've just got time... OK, I have just got time to bring you some breaking news. There we go. ITV has instructed a barrister to carry out an external review of the facts following Philip Schofield's statement and departure from this morning. I'll read that to you one more time. Breaking news, ITV has instructed a barrister to carry out an external review of the facts following Philip Schofield's statement and departure from this morning. OK, so that's the breaking news. I'm going to now, I believe, return to the motoring story I was doing about whether or not drivers were getting ripped off by speed cameras at 20 miles an hour. Joining me now is motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Quentin, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, is this actually some kind of cash cow for motorists then, or rather for councils and governments to try to rip motorists off, or is it all about safety?
Well, look, it's very important to say that we are not condoning speed limits, excess speed, and these figures are the highest we've ever seen on record in terms of convictions. Now, a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit is appropriate at schools and hospitals and where there are vulnerable pedestrians, but we're seeing more and more councils rolling these out as blanket speed limits all over the area. Now, you look at the decriminalisation of parking, you look at the decriminalisation of yellow boxes and bus lanes, which are revenue streams, and you ask the obvious question, is this also another cash cow for them? The big problem for me is that this camera road policing, which we've had for a long, long time, does it stop the drunk drivers? Does it stop the drug drivers, the drivers without insurance, the drivers without licenses, those who are a real threat to society? And is it not focusing on somebody who is doing 24 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour limit and is as much of a threat to society as what a banana skin? So it's priorities that have gone the wrong way. Sure, we need to cut back on excess speed, but is this not a step far too far?
Yeah, indeed. And I just wonder, really, whether it's that necessary. I mean, does it actually speed up, well, reduce congestion? Does it actually do anything to impact pollution? Does it actually keep people that safe? Because you combine this with the ULEZ charges that people are facing now, and I just want to see some hardcore evidence that any of this is actually working, other than raising money for councils, for governments, etc., with the old fines.
Well, the data at the moment doesn't show that we're making a significant impact on what they call KSIs, killed and serious injuries. And the absence of police cars on our roads is a real problem for me, because you drive everywhere and you will see examples of really poor driving, which goes completely unpunished. And it's there we've decriminalized dangerous driving, and it's much easier for us to put up cameras and to catch law-abiding, compliant people like you and I, who have the cars registered on AIM and we're insured and we're MOT'd and we've got a license, than the people who are the real threat to society. And that, for me, the priorities are completely wrong.
They are, and there is a world of difference between someone who repeatedly breaks the speed limit doing 100 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour or whatever, and someone who's doing, like you said, 24 miles an hour in a 20. We shouldn't be criminalising these people.
No, and also it takes away the goodwill of the public towards road safety initiatives. If you're having to sit in your car and look at your speedometer, trying desperately to keep under 20 miles an hour, it makes a mockery of the whole thing. So when you do get laudable, well-intentioned road safety initiatives, we tend to go, well, you know, why do we bother? And this kind of persecution of the motorist is just... It's gone too far. We have to get around the country. We have congestion. We have huge fuel costs, the cost of running your car, and this on top. And tell me that this is a really valuable, important road safety initiative that's making a significant difference, and then I'll justify it. But since so many councils have jumped on the bandwagon, you do begin to scratch your head.
All right. Thank you, Quentin. Great stuff. Quentin Wilson there, motoring journalist. Right, just a quick recap of that big breaking news that I brought you a few moments ago. ITV has instructed a barrister to carry out an external review of the facts following Schofield's statement and departure from this morning. Michelle Dewberry is here. Jubes & Co. up next.
Hello.
You all right?
Yeah, it's all going on, isn't it?
It's
It's unravelling by the second, all of this,
More
isn't
to
it?
come.
I've got to say, I'm relatively new to this whole media world, but I do find it pretty farcical just how much stuff is actually known. I don't think this is the end of this. I've been glued to Eamon's stuff with Dan in the evening. It's been riveting. I don't imagine we're going to see Holly back on that sofa anytime soon, do you?
No, I certainly don't. People are saying she's damaged goods. What else you got on there? Quickly.
Oh, yes. Labour's plans to seize property at below its possible value when it comes to building houses. I've got Ben Habib, the property owner, on versus a socialist. Completely different opinions on that one. Just Stop Oil, we'll talk about that. And the airline as well.
Lovely stuff. All right, thank you very much. Michelle Dewberry up next. I'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Take it easy, people.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. I'm Craig Snell. Looking ahead to the next few days, for most of us it's largely dry and settled. Best of the sunshine always out towards the west, and that's where we see the highest temperatures. Reason for the settled weather is this huge area of high pressure. It's not going to go anywhere over the next few days. Weak weather fronts may just squeeze out a few spots of rain for the far north of Scotland, but for most, as we end Wednesday, we end on a dry note. Best of the late sunshine out towards the west. The further east you are, you will see some low cloud coming in off the North Sea, and that will gradually spread its way westwards as we go through the course of the night. So under the cloud cover, temperatures not falling away too low, 8, 9, possibly 10 degrees in a few spots, but out towards the west where we do see the clear skies, it could turn quite chilly first thing on Thursday morning. But here we will see sunshine from the word go, so a lovely start today for parts of Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. Elsewhere, the cloud will gradually burn its way back towards the North Sea as we go through the course of the morning. So I'm fairly optimistic by the afternoon. Lots of